Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, like the video, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a comment on if you would want more. This fan fiction was not created by me, but in the description there is a link to the fanfic so you can show your support to the creator and read along. Without any more delay, let's dive into the story.
Ainz and Taylar had gone to the City Hall building to await the envoy from the Draconic Kingdom. Ainz didn't want to wait for them to travel all the way there, so he tasked Solution to gather all those that came, since she was the one in Urantal today, and was having Oriel gate them just outside of Karn. Ainz didn't want to gate them right into the city as he liked for those coming to see what kind of city they were entering, so it gave them a bit of time before the envoy arrived. Taylar thought this was perfect, and she couldn't stop herself from asking Ainz something she had wanted to for 2 days now. So, my love. Ainz's gaze moved to Taylar. Did you finally give in and take Narbril after seeing her all dressed up looking like a princess?
No.
What would make you think I would? Oh, please. I see your eyes roaming over her when she is wearing that ugly brown cloak that covers most of her. I could only imagine what your eyes would look like if she was dressed like that. I don't. Ainz stopped himself at the glare Taylar sent him. Okay, I think Narbril is fucking sexy as hell. She looks like she should be the Empress of Japan. Is that what you wanted to hear? Finally, Taylar lets out a breath at his admission. So, why didn't you do something about it then? You're not worried I'd have a problem with it, are you? No, I wasn't, and you already know why I didn't. Not only do I already have Albedo, but... Taylar finished that sentence for him. You're still worried what Nishi would think, aren't you? When Ainz nods at her, she continues. You are looking at this all wrong, my love. First, it's not like I would mind if you had another Albedo, but neither of us knows if Narbril would mind being with both of us. I have seen her checking me out a few times, so I really wouldn't mind then. Second, if not you, it will be no one. Narbril will end up completely alone, forever. There is no way Narbril would lay with another man who wasn't you unless ordered to do so, and we both know we would never order her to do something like that. And lastly, Nishi was your best friend. Who would care for Narbril more than you? Are you just doing it so you can fuck her brains out? Of course not. If that is how I thought, almost all of Nazarick would have joined us in bed already. Then I don't see what your problem is. You're not just using Narbril for some relief. You have plenty of us for that. She winks at him. Why not ask her? I already know she'd say yes to you. You're the only man I've ever seen her eyes roam over with a look other than sizing him up to figure out the best way to kill him. Are you just saying this because you have lupus Regina? Are you trying to make sure I have more women in my life than you do? Ainz couldn't help but chuckle, and Taylar giggled as well. That wasn't true, but it was funny. Plus, Ainz seems to forget something that Taylar reminded him of. No and no. Plus, I've only fooled around with lupus Regina a couple of times without you. It isn't like a Albedo situation where I have her all to myself. You've fucked that redhead plenty of times, my love. That's true. Would you really be alright if it turned out the way Albedo did? I don't want you to think I don't love you. Please, I know very well how much you love me, for I love you just as much, if not more. And if it does turn out like Albedo, I won't mind. Perhaps I can find a Pleiades all for myself. Taylar grins at Ainz. I hear Solution fools around with Shaltir and her vampire brides. I have always wanted to bury my face in those big tits of hers. Would you be joining Solution with or without Shaltir and her vampire brides? I like the way you think. Although, I'll have to exclude Clementine from that if I do. I'm not sure Albedo would ever touch me again if I let that woman touch me. Perhaps I can have Shaltir to myself? You certainly don't find the lowly look Pero loved arousing or Shaltir would have already joined us. You know it doesn't have to do with her being petite or having a young-looking face. It's the fact all of her looks like a 12-year-old. I need a woman. I need to feel some curves. I may think Shaldir is cute, but she got a flat chest, narrow hips, and no ass. Give her those, and I'd have her screaming in a second. Well then. Taylar giggles. Perhaps I'll have my own Rabido and Shaltir then, because I'm not sure anyone from Nazarick is going to mature, and if they do, it won't be for a very, very long time. Ainz chuckles again and pulls Taylar into him. This woman was perfect in every sense of the word. I suppose time will tell, my love. I'll talk to Narbril when I get a chance then. I'll let you know how it goes as soon as I do. Good. If she wants to jump your bones immediately, like, I think she will message me. I don't mind if she wants her first time alone with you, but if she agrees to be with both of us, I want to be there for the rest of it. Taylar winks, pecks him on the lips, and then walks away with an exaggerated sway of her hips that Ainz still has no power to look away from. Now he wanted to grab her, teleport anywhere even somewhat private, and make her scream. Unfortunately, the envoy would be here very soon. He didn't have time to worship her properly, and Ainz still had more people to talk to. He meant to do it earlier, but it slipped his mind with all the touring and new residents arriving. Ashrin, Tinia, Sarah. Ainz calls out, and all three turn to face him as he walks toward them. After I meet with this envoy, I wish for you three to accompany me to the temple. Uzratha's body has been delivered and prepared. I have thought of the perfect undead for him to be turned into per your request. We will be happy to accompany you, your majesty. Ashrin was the one who spoke, but Sarah and Tinia all smiled and bowed at her words as well. Ainz had a good idea. They'd enjoy this very much. He was excited to see how this undead worked in this world. He had yet to create one of these because the situation hadn't warranted one to be created, but this was the perfect moment for it. As he made his way toward his throne here, he noticed that Taylar had already taken her seat and was talking with Lockhews at the moment. He only needed to take a few steps toward them to hear their conversation. You are willing to let me build a temple to the water god in Karn? Of course, we believe in freedom of religion, so you may follow whichever gods you chose. Although, I'm not sure how your god would feel about us creating one, so I'll refrain from that, but I'll lend you the labor to build one if you wish. You'll need to be the one who sees to its maintenance and its staff, though. If your majesty believes in allowing people to follow any gods, why is there only one temple in Karn? May I answer her question for you, your majesty? Taylar smiles at Ashrin and nods for the girl to continue. It was so nice having subordinates who were willing to step into conversations. That is because every resident of this city follows the same religion, Lady Lockhews. Most of our citizens are former farmers, slaves, and demi-humans who were looked down upon. They were never devout followers of the Four or the Six, but now that they have witnessed the might and power of their majesties, it is easy for them to follow our two supreme beings and our goddess of beauty, desire, and strength. Two supreme beings? Are there not three monarchs that rule these lands? You are correct, but Her Majesty, exalted Queen Albedo, does not wish to be called a supreme being. So we worship her as the goddess of beauty, desire, and strength that she is. I have met Her Majesty, so I understand seeing her as a goddess of beauty and desire. But strength? Her Majesty looks so. Lockhews was having trouble finishing that sentence, but Ashrin already knew what Lockhews was trying to say. Womanly? Or perhaps you mean soft. unable to hurt a fly, or the picture of a caring mother? Locuse thought all of those would have done, so she only nodded her head before Ashrin continued. She is all of that and more, Lady Locuse. What did you witness to call Her Majesty such a title? Ashrin smiled a bit at the memory. For the longest time, she believed just as Locuse did. She knew exalted Queen Albedo was strong. She could sense it from her, but she truly had no idea how strong until she saw it with her own eyes. I was with Her Majesty walking around Karn. One of our resident trolls knocked down a small human child. Our queen demanded he apologizes for hurting a small child, but when he refused and stated it was the child's fault for being so weak, she told him how that was no longer tolerated in their kingdom and threw him out of the city. Locuse stood there silently waiting for the story to go longer, but it looked like Ashrin was finished. Locuse had no idea how that showed exalted Queen Albedo was strong, but Ashrin did that on purpose to draw out the suspense. She continued right as Locuse was about to say something. I'm sure you're wondering how that makes her the goddess of strength? That's because we were only about 200 feet from where we're currently standing, and she grabbed the troll by the wrist and threw him completely over every wall and out of the city. Locuse's jaw, along with every other member of Blue Rose, dropped open. The distance you would have to throw someone to get them out of the city from the center was tremendous. It was honestly hard to believe, but it didn't look to any of them as if Ashrin was lying about it. Ashrin's giggle at their expressions was soon followed by words. I had much the same reaction when I saw it. So you see, that is why she is the goddess of strength, and why everyone here worships the three gods that walk amongst us. With their majesty's power, their subordinates, and all of their people working together, we all know and can feel the divine protection granted to us by them. I see. Locuse looks in a daze before she bows to Taylar and Ainz. Your Majesties. She walks out of the hall with the rest of Blue Rose trailing her. It was quite the sight to see a dumbfounded and confused Locuse to everyone else. I think you may have broken her brain, Ashrin. Ashrin turns to her god and bows her head to Ainz. It was her job as High Priestess to show others the error of their ways following false gods. That went at least twofold for priests, priestesses, and paladins of the 4 and 6. I simply opened her eyes to the truth, Your Majesty. Ashrin turns and bows to Taylar. I will have her as one of your priestesses in no time, my queen. There will be no need to ruin the majestic skyline of Karn with a temple to a false god. There is no need for you to do that, Ashrin. Locuse may worship her water god, if she likes. Also, we will not use our magic to create that temple, so it will not be nearly as large as ours. You may rest easy knowing it will not reach the skyline of this city. I am your High Priestess, Your Majesties. It is part of my calling to convert non-believers and followers of false gods to your side. I know, however, that your will is what matters most, so I will not push to convert her. I do ask for permission to try if Lady Locuse comes to me to debate or discuss religion. That is fine, Ashrin. Just don't seek her out to convert her. If she seeks you out, you have our permission to try. When Blue Rose had left, they all simply followed Locuse as she started walking down the roads of Karn. At least it looked as if she was walking toward their new home, but they didn't even make it halfway before Kino couldn't take it anymore and had to say something. Locuse? Their leader didn't acknowledge her, so she said louder. Locuse? Are you all right? That finally got the blonde's attention, and she stopped dead in her tracks to look at Kino. The easiest answer to her question was no, but Locuse needed to talk about what just happened out with someone. Did everything she just say sound completely impossible, but completely factual to you? Yes, Kino hesitates for a moment. She felt something in the air when Ashrin was speaking about her gods. I believed it all even if it sounded completely impossible, and Laki's cut her off but said almost exactly what Kino was about to. You felt the conviction in that high priestess's voice, didn't you? Like it was burying itself inside your heart, telling you all of that and more was true. I've never met a priestess so devoted to her gods who spoke with such authority and self-belief, and I've been a devoted priestess almost my entire life. Yes, she was very. Kino went to continue, but it was Tina who cut her off. It was absolutely not what Kino was going to say, though. Hot. Everyone looks at her sideways a bit. While they liked to tease Locke's about liking women since she was still a virgin and never looked at men, they didn't actually think any of them were into women. It sounded though like Tina might be into that high priestess. Her tone did not sound teasing at all. Tina liked the look on all their faces, so she kept at it. Like all of you didn't notice. Natural blue hair, bright green eyes, and not to mention, she pokes Locke's shoulder. Her high priestess robes were much more form-fitting than this baggy, unflattering thing you wear, evil boss. Even with the smirk now on her lips, no one in Blue Rose could tell if she was joking. She didn't wait for their brains to work and walked past them all, headed toward their new home. She was excited to get settled. Tina had never lived in a place so gorgeous. It was easily 100 times more luxurious than their old headquarters. Not long after Blue Rose had left, Ainz and Taylar received word that the envoy was getting ready to pull up to City Hall. Ainz wishes his screenshot function worked outside of Nazarick. He would have loved to capture Henry's face when he asked her to sit in the empty throne since she was mayor. Once she recovered from the shock, though, she refused adamantly. Nothing Ainz could say would sway her, but he at least got her to stand next to Taylar. He made Albedo sit on the throne instead. She protested as well, but he knew she wouldn't deny him if he pushed hard enough. The door swung open, and a human walked inside. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, and was dressed pretty well. Ainz admired the man's bravery. He knows the man was told he could bring his guards in with their weapons, but he left them outside to wait. The Herald of Karn was actually the former herald to the mayor of Irantal. When they were seated the city, the mayor had left, but Alan was still present. Ainz thought the man's voice was perfect for the job and offered for him to do the same for Henry. Occasionally, he'd have to do it for Ainz and Taylar when Yuri wasn't around. This was one of those times. You stand in the presence of Ainz Olgaun, exalted king of the Psycho Kingdom, god of death, destruction, war, magic, souls, knowledge, and the underworld. Taylar Olgaun, exalted queen of the Psycho Kingdom, goddess of beauty, love, magic, and creation. And Lady Albedo, head ambassador of the Psycho Kingdom. Your Majesties, may I present Lord Aiden Edro, envoy of the Draconic Kingdom. Your Majesties, Lord Edrobos, I am grateful for you seeing me on such short notice. You have traveled a long way to see us, Lord Edro, and we were quite curious to hear why you have come. We know some of your military might used to come from the Baharuth Empire, but we assumed your connection to the slain theocracy would keep you far from our borders. A good amount of that was the honest truth. Ainz, Taylar, and Albedo knew the queen of the Draconic Kingdom wasn't happy with the slain theocracy, but didn't suspect they would come to the Psycho Kingdom for an audience. While they did know a little about every nation's leaders they could, Oriole couldn't watch everyone all the time, and she wasn't omnipotent. They had her focusing on the Holy Kingdom and slain theocracy now, so they hadn't checked on the Draconic Kingdom in months. Of course, keeping his eyes on the Riestai's kingdom and Baharuth Empire was still important, but they had plenty of spies in those countries. Oriel's skills were not needed in such places except to verify findings every now and then. We are not, Your Majesty. The Baharuth Empire only sends troops to aid us because if the beast men conquer us, they are next. As far as the slain theocracy goes, we have to pay for them to send one of their units to us. They are the strongest we know of who could lend aid. That is as far as our relationship with those nations goes, Your Majesties. Are you here to hire us as military aid since you believe we are stronger than the slain theocracy? No, I am not exalted Queen Taylar. My queen has sent me here to try and build a stronger bond between our countries and wishes to form a permanent alliance with the Psycho Kingdom. And what terms does your queen propose to form an alliance with the Psycho Kingdom, Lord Aiden? Queen Draudelin Auriculus proposes that we join our countries in the strongest bond possible. As such, my queen offers her hand in marriage to exalted King Ainz Olgaun to become his third queen. To say Ainz didn't see that coming would be the understatement of the millennia. He had honestly never thought people would see he had two queens and offer to be his third. In fact, he assumed that already having two queens would prevent this very thing from happening. Ainz had absolutely no intention of having another queen. Well, not one from this world. He'd be lying if he said he didn't want a third queen. He already knew who he wanted that to be, though. He never got to say any of that, though, because someone else spoke before he could. No. Taylar's anger had risen so much, she stood up from her throne to say that as she glared at the man. She thought the man was cowering because of the angry tone she took, but failed to realize she let her anger go too far. The man was sinking to the floor because she was crushing him with her aura. That didn't register as she continued berating not only the man, but also his queen. What makes your wannabe dragon queen think she is worthy to marry my husband? She thinks because she calls herself a queen that makes her worthy of the greatest king this world has ever seen? I should crush you under my heel and send your false queen your tiny pieces back to her as a message, you little piece of fuck dash. My love. Taylar's ire is reeled in quickly when she hears Ain's soft tone. Lord Aiden then collapsed to the floor and started heaving in oxygen, trying to catch his breath. The envoy of the Draconic Kingdom thought it would be a long shot himself, but never thought he would get such a violent and terrifying reaction. The conversation between Ainz and Taylar barely registered in his brain. There is no need to get so worked up at the man, my queen. The little we know of the Draconic Kingdom tells us they would have nothing to offer us in terms of an alliance. This was probably the only choice they had given their circumstances. They probably believed I would take a third queen since I already have two. Oh, I understand that, my king. She placed a quick kiss on his lips before smirking at him. However, that tiny little queen should have known she was unworthy to even ask the question. The world has seen not just her power, but mine as well. And she believes herself worthy to be a queen that stands by her side? No, she is a bug, and I will squash her for thinking herself worthy of such an honor. Ainz looked away from Taylar, and at the envoy who had turned about 3 shades whiter before he started laughing. Her protectiveness of him was both funny and adorable. Funny for obvious reasons since their bed was always occupied with one other woman, and sometimes two. Not to mention his relationship with Albedo and the conversation they just had about Narbril. It was adorable how she would fly into a rage when she thought someone unworthy thought they had a chance. He was pretty sure that just meant those from this new world. Although, with how close she was with Ninya and Ashran, that might not be entirely true to him now that he thinks about it. The answer would have been no without my queen's rage. Ainz chuckles as he looks at the envoy. It isn't until then he looks back at Taylar without worrying he is going to burst out in laughter. How about we employ a less violent means, my love? I'll go speak with his queen and see if we can come to some sort of other arrangements. Sound good? And why, pray tell, do you need to be the one to go? Ainz tried not to laugh at Taylor's tone, but he couldn't hold back the chuckle. From the sound of her voice, she thought he was going there to accept her offer. If she wasn't so angry, the reason would probably be clear to her. Well, you already threatened to squash poor Lord Aiden over there as well as his queen like bugs, and Albedo is indisposed at the moment. That just leaves me. Ainz looks back at the envoy. Lord Aiden, I still have business to handle in the city before I can depart. It should only take about 10 to 15 minutes. Can you have your men gathered at the front gate by then? The man went to open his mouth, but Taylar cut him off before he could even speak. I also need you for some things before you depart, so make it an hour. Is that all right with you, my lord? Taylar might have asked it like a question, but the man could tell by her glare it was a command. O of Seacourse, Wire and Majesty. The man bowed and ran out of the throne room as fast as he possibly could. Ainz wanted to laugh again, but he simply stood, grabbed Taylar's hand, and laid a kiss on the back of it before making his way over toward Ashran, Tinya, and Sarah. They all disappeared when Ainz and Taylar got over to them. When they reappeared, they were in the bottom of the temple. All of them were staring at a body wrapped tightly in white wrappings with a black script on them. Ashran could tell it was the language of the supreme beings, but couldn't make out what any of it said. The mummy was also slightly different from the ones Ashran had knowledge of. There were small differences other than the wrapping. For example, each finger was individually wrapped instead of being wrapped like a mitt. The wrappings were in pristine condition as well, which was unusual. Other than that, it looked like any other mummy the high priestess had ever seen. Luckily for Ashran, Ainz explained what was about to happen before he used Uzratha's body. As you can see, I will be turning Uzrath into a mummy, but not just any type of mummy. He shall be what is known as a tomb warden. This temple will be his tomb. As such, he will be stronger inside the temple and up to 100 feet outside of it. Within those ranges, he will be level 80. Ainz then remembers he never explained to these three elves the level system their world was based on. He probably should at some point, but he didn't have time for that now, so he explained it in a way they would understand. That is to say, he will be a little more powerful than someone such as Lupus Regina. However, if he steps out of the range I specified, his power will be halved. He would then be more along the lines of the power of a Death Knight. Ainz saw that all three of them understood what he was talking about, so he decided it was a good time to give them the rest of the details. He will always retain his intelligence no matter the distance he travels, and his hands are bound individually, so he can perform tasks a normal mummy cannot. He will be able to take notes for you, transcribe sermons, and anything else you can think of. He will also be a lot more intelligent than you would believe. As a base to think on, a tomb warden is a little more than twice as smart as an elder lich. Ainz can see all three of their eyes widen at that statement. Even the farmers of Karn knew that elder liches were magic casters, so their intelligence would be rather high, but it shocked the three elves that their new guardian would be at least twice as smart. Lastly, while he is incredibly intelligent, He will have no recollection of what his life was like before being created. As such, he will have no idea who you are or what he did to you in the past. While he will answer to myself, Taylar, or Albedo before any others, I will place him under the three of you to use him, as you see fit. Are all of you still all right with your decision to make him a servant of this temple? Absolutely, Lord Ainz. Ainz was not. The woman usually called them your divine majesty or some other godly title. It was more surprising to hear Ashrin say Lord Ainz than even the marriage proposal from the draconic queen. Create two Morden. Ashrin had seen her god create many undead over the course of the last few months, but this was something different. Ashrin watched the negative energy begin to cover Uzratha's body, but in a much different way than normal. Normally, the black sludge would work its way over a corpse and move around until it covered them completely before it would stand up as a Death Knight, Soul Eater, or some other terrifying undead. This time, as the sludge made its way from the mummy's head, it seeped into the cracks in the wrappings as it went down its body. Once the negative energy had entered at the mummy's feet, Ashrin watched as its eyes glowed an unnatural blue color before it sat up on the tomb. The mummy quickly threw its legs over the side and fell to one knee in front of Lord Ainz before saying, "How may I serve you, master?" There was no raspiness to the mummy's voice as almost all undead had, but this didn't surprise Ashrin in the slightest. After her god had allowed her to touch his scythe and she heard all of those souls in her mind, Ashrin was not surprised by any of the powers the god of death held. She would never forget that moment for as long as she lived, and hoped she bore witness to what he had planned with his weapon. The look in his eye when she asked what powers his scythe bore got her just as excited to witness it as the words he spoke to her. Someday, this world will see my true power, Ashrin. On that day, everyone shall bear witness to the true power of the god of death and what my beloved death's calling is truly capable of. Ashrin had borderline begged to be allowed to bear witness to such a thing, but her god could not promise such a thing when he didn't know when he would use his true power. Ashrin only hoped she was still alive when he did use it. She would give anything to witness her god and goddess's true power, as she knew they only used a fraction of their might. Tomb Warden, you shall serve me by protecting this temple and following the orders of the three women you see standing beside me. Ainz takes a moment to point to all three of the elves. It only takes a moment for the Tomb Warden to commit each of their faces to memory before dropping to a knee once more and bowing his head. As you command, Master. Ainz and Taylar then showed the three elves exactly where this tunnel came out at. Ashrin was surprised when they came out from behind a bookshelf in her office. The description of how to open the door was surprising as well. It was obviously a secret entrance, but having to move certain books before you pulled the hidden lever was what surprised all three of them. They all did pay close attention to the explanation, though. The moment Ainz told them traps would activate if they didn't open it this way made them pay even closer attention to what they were explaining. Once Ainz had finished, he still needed to do whatever it was Taylar needed him for. They both teleported to Nazarick only for Ainz to find out what Taylar needed him to do was, well, Taylar. He had no idea if she was trying to mark her territory for his journey, but he enjoyed it all the same. Perhaps a little too much, as he ended up taking an hour and a half instead of the hour he told the envoy he would be. The man was on his timetable anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. He was under no obligation to help the Draconic Kingdom, and he was sure 30 extra minutes wouldn't mean the destruction of their country. Ainz would never forget the look on Lord Aiden's face when he asked if Ainz would be riding with him since he saw no carriage for the king. Ainz simply smiled as he looked at the Lord and said, "I have no need for one." A purple circle with arcane runes had manifested right below them after he said that, and Lord Aiden had to close his eyes when it started to glow. When he opened his eyes, he was leaning out of the door of his carriage staring right at the entrance to the palace in the capital of the Draconic Kingdom. To say the man was dumbfounded would be an understatement. It had taken nearly a month to travel to Irantal by carriage, but they had somehow made it from Karn to the capital in seconds. He wanted to ask so many questions, but his brain still wasn't working, and exalted King Ainz spoke before he could think of what to say out loud. "I know this is abrupt, so I will wait out here for you to inform your queen I wish to speak with her. There is no rush, but don't leave me waiting for too long, Lord Aiden." "As you wish, your majesty." Lord Aiden made his way into the palace in a daze. He still couldn't comprehend he was back in the Draconic Kingdom. Ainz waited in the courtyard as he watched the envoy head into the palace. He was a little disappointed on the outside of the palace. Ainz had only ever laid eyes on a couple of rooms inside the palace to spy on some meetings the queen was having, and it looked like any other palace he had seen. However, the outside was a different story. He wouldn't quite say it was falling apart, but it was in dire need of some maintenance, that was for sure. He did not fail to notice everyone in the courtyard staring at him. The small folk were staring wide-eyed in disbelief. The nobles were doing much the same, and the soldiers were looking at him warily, most of their hands resting on the pommels of their weapons. Normally, he wouldn't mind testing out their abilities, but he could see they were somewhere in power between the knights of the Baharuth Empire and the conscripts of the Riestei's kingdom, so there was no need to test out warriors who were so weak. Ainz surprisingly had little time to check out the surrounding area as Lord Aiden returned only about 10 minutes after he had left. While he didn't expect to wait long, he didn't think he would be able to speak with the queen so quickly after just showing up out of nowhere. "Your Majesty." Lord Aiden bowed to him once more. "Queen Draudalin is ready to see you." "Lead the way, Lord Aiden." Ainz followed the man through the palace as they made their way to the throne room. The palace looked much better on the inside, as Ainz knew it would. The palace on the inside was just as the soldiers outside were. A little better than the Riestei's kingdom, but not as nice as the Baharuth Empire. Ainz noticed Lord Aiden nod to the man at the door as they approached a large set of doors that more than likely led to the throne room. Once the doors swung open, Ainz heard a voice boom through the air. "His Majesty, the exalted king of the Psycho Kingdom, Ainz Olgaun." Ainz had to admit, the herald was good at his job. Lord Aiden was probably the one to inform him how to introduce him, and it worked well. Perhaps he'd have to include the herald in his deal with the Draconic Queen, but he wasn't sure exactly where he could use the man. Alan was very good at his job. As he walked in, he could see Queen Draudalin sitting on her throne. He almost sighed in relief when he saw her sitting there in her older woman form. He isn't sure he'd be able to negotiate with someone appearing as a small child. The queen was rather attractive in her more mature form. Unlike her child form, she had obvious curves that stood out easily. Her chest was rather large, her waist was slim, and even sitting on her throne, Ainz could see the curve of her hips. She had dark blue hair that looked almost black. Her eyes were a piercing light blue color, and her face was rather attractive. He had heard the talk of Renner and Kelka being the most beautiful royalty in this world, but he was certain that was because they only thought of the draconic queen as a child. This woman was much more attractive than either Renner or Kelka could ever hope to be. To be honest, if Ainz had come here without Taylar or the rest of Nazarick, he would probably have asked for Draudelin's hand in marriage at some point to cement his reign here. He certainly preferred what he saw in front of him to the other female royalty of this world he knew of. It is an honor to have you in my halls, Your Majesty. I am Queen Draudelin Auriculus, ruler of the Draconic Kingdom. The honor is mine, Your Majesty. I welcome the idea of an alliance with the Psycho Kingdom, Your Majesty. Shall we retire somewhere a little more private to discuss terms? I believe that is a great idea, Queen Draudelin. Ainz motions to his side. Please, lead the way, Your Majesty. Draudelin rose from her throne and headed straight toward the conference room after motioning for Ainz to follow. Draudelin was honestly feeling much different than she normally did. For most of the last 10 years, she has taken on the form of a little girl to appease the Lilicons of her kingdom into helping her, celebrate in particular. However, she thought it better to appear in her mature form to meet with exalted King Ainz Olgaun, and she was not disappointed. Draudelin didn't miss the way he checked her out as he entered the throne room, and it felt good to see the look of approval in his eyes at her curvy, mature form. She finally felt like a woman and queen again instead of some little piece of meat for perverts to leer at. She'd be lying if she wasn't disappointed he didn't accept her proposal. She had gotten a good description of Ainz from her advisors before offering up marriage, but their descriptions did not do him justice. Ainz was by far the most handsome man she had ever laid eyes on. He was so good-looking, in fact, you could call him beautiful. Everything about him said king in her eyes. He was absurdly tall, a few inches shorter than 7 feet by her estimation. His short, jet-black hair went perfect with his handsome face, and his ruby-red eyes looked as if they were staring straight into your soul. All of that was only his physical appearance. His clothing was by far the most expensive and regal she had ever seen. Draudelin could also feel an immense amount of power radiating from him, and it drew her in like a moth to the flame. She knew it was a long shot for her proposal to be accepted. She had heard all of her advisors tell her that both of his queens were of a beauty that none could match in the world. However, now that she laid eyes on him, she got the very good idea to go spend some time in the Psycho Kingdom getting to know his queens. Perhaps then, she could convince them she could also be one of his queens. She had never cared to have a husband before, no matter how often she was reminded she needed an heir, but that was before laying eyes on this foreign king. It helped her confidence that she knew he at least found her somewhat appealing. A man's gaze does not look a woman up and down as he did when he entered if he didn't at least believe she was somewhat attractive. Even as he moved beside her to walk toward the conference room, she could feel his gaze on her. She didn't have the will to see if he was still checking her out or simply looking in the same direction as her, but she could feel it nonetheless. When they finally made it to the conference room, Draudelin had a hard time not simply staring at his pretty face as he took the seat across from her. Thank you again for receiving me so quickly upon my sudden arrival, Queen Draudelin. I should be the one thanking you for coming to see if we could work out an alliance, Your Majesty. I wish I could have given you an audience the moment you arrived, but... Draudelin realized what she was about to say and stopped herself. That wouldn't be good to admit, but it seemed Ainz knew exactly what she was about to say. But you had to change your appearance? Ainz chuckles at her surprised expression. You have nothing to worry about, Your Majesty. I am honestly glad for it. It would be rather awkward to speak with someone who once proposed marriage to me if she appeared in front of me as a small child. Drawdalin giggled. Yep, she fucking giggled. A real, girly, excited, happy giggle. She couldn't remember the last time she actually did that. She composed herself quickly, though, to try and get things moving forward. Her kingdom was in real danger, and she knew that this king would be, by far, her best hope at saving her kingdom. In truth, I'm glad to speak with someone who prefers me in my regular form. Pretending to be a child is more taxing than you would believe, Your Majesty. Now, I hope you don't mind my forwardness, but I'd like to discuss our possible alliance immediately, if that is all right with you. It is Queen Drawdalin. I prefer to get right to it. I skipped all the fanfare of arrival by carriage because I don't have a lot of time to secure this alliance. Of course, if we can't come to an agreement, it doesn't mean it will never happen. It just means we would have to revisit it at a later date. Please call me Drawdalin. We are both monarchs here and in a private meeting. As you wish, Drawdalin. Please afford me the same courtesy and call me Ainz. Of course, Ainz. I was hoping you had some idea as to what you would need to secure this alliance. The reason I offered marriage is I have nothing else to truly offer. Our gold has been depleted over years of having to hire outside help. Our army once numbered over 100,000, but now is less than half of that, and after losing 3 of our cities, we can't offer you any of the grain or mining resources we once had. Ainz was a little taken aback by how truthful Drawdalin had been about her situation. He already knew all of that, but for her to admit it to him right off the bat was unexpected. Usually, someone was very tight-lipped about their resources, and especially their military might when entering negotiations. Ainz wondered to himself if Taylar and Albedo would be all right with that marriage she offered one day. It seemed this queen truly only did care about saving her people and not what was best for herself. He thought it best to be honest with her as well. He wouldn't tell her nearly as much as she told him, but he'd return trust with trust. Well, that was very honest of you. Ainz chuckles. I'll be honest myself then. After meeting you, I'm not entirely opposed to your offer of marriage, but we do not have time for that to work itself out. By the time you convinced my queens, your country would probably be lost. Ainz said he'd tell the truth, and he did. She'd never convince either of them that quickly that she could be a queen of their kingdom. He thought she might one day, but it certainly wouldn't be soon enough for her needs. Unless her kingdom could hold out for a few decades, maybe a century. I realize you have little to offer, but there must be something else you could offer. I would like to help you, as I don't like to see people suffer needlessly, but I can't risk my people if there is nothing in it for my kingdom. Ainz watched as Drawdalin looked to the only other person she brought into the room with her. He knew this man to be the Prime Minister, but she hadn't introduced him yet, so it wouldn't be good to tell her he knew that. A small nod of his head was all he saw before Drawdalin looked back at him. What if I bent the knee and pledged our fealty to you as a vassal kingdom? Ainz knew she was going to say that, and of course, he had a response ready for that. We would have to decline then. If you swore yourselves as a vassal nation, I'd have an obligation to defend you against the beast men and will not gain anything in return. After we defeated the beast men, it would still take a considerable amount of gold and other resources to build your kingdom back up. It would probably be centuries before we saw any gain from accepting you as a vassal. Is there nothing else you can offer? The defeated look on Drawdalin's face was clear for Ainz to see. He was hoping she had something else to offer that he was unaware of. It wasn't as if they had spied the whole draconic kingdom. Truthfully, he knew some of the faces from the palace, and that was about it. They had no need to worry about the Draconic Kingdom, so they focused their resources elsewhere. No, I can't think of anything else, unfortunately. This war has depleted everything we once had in abundance. There is nothing dash. My queen. Drawdalin turns to the Prime Minister wondering why he interrupted her. Perhaps we should see if His Majesty is interested in the mine we discovered a while back. Ainz saw the realization when it dawned on Drawdalin's face. He couldn't help but ask. What mine? Our miners discovered a mine about a century ago, but we have ceased all attempts to mine the ore found in it. There is something about it that is different, and our attempts to mine it over the years have cost us a few lives. When we try to remove it from the earth, it either burns our miners, electrocutes them, or even makes them disappear. I didn't want to lose any more people, so I had the mine closed. We haven't even attempted to mine anything from it in over 2 decades. To say Ainz was interested would be the understatement of the century. By the sounds of it, he knew exactly what they were trying to mine, and why they had no success in mining it. If it turned out to be true, the Draconic Kingdom could become the most important piece of land in their kingdom. Could I inspect this mine myself? I'd have to see this ore for myself before I could consider it as proper compensation for the war we would be accepting. Of course. Yura, could you please bring me the map? The Prime Minister nods his head and heads off to fetch the map for Drawdalin. Drawdalin couldn't help but stare at Ainz as they waited for Yura to return. She was thinking about his words over and over in her mind. After meeting you, I'm not entirely opposed to your offer of marriage. That was all the woman could think about as they waited. Now, there was no thinking about visiting the Psycho Kingdom. She was going there for certain and spending as much time with his 2 queens as they would allow her to. She wasn't opposed to it before Ainz showed up, and after meeting him, she was completely enamored with the idea, if she was being honest. She hadn't realized how hard she had been checking out Ainz until she looked up and saw the smirk on his face. Luckily, Yura came back before she could even open her mouth. She quickly had him spread the map out and show him the location of the mine. Oriole, open a gate for me when you find this mine. Yes, father. Drawdalin was explaining how to get to the mine when a gate opened next to Ainz in the conference room. He suppressed his chuckle at Drawdalin and Yura's reaction. He was quick to assure them and tell them what was going on, though. Not to worry, this is how I'm going to check out this mine quickly. I shall return shortly. Ainz didn't even wait for a response. He simply stepped into the gate. Oriole had opened it up right at the entrance of the mine, and Ainz saw Drawdalin wasn't kidding. She truly had shut this thing down. There were signs everywhere warning of the danger of entering the mine, but those didn't deter him. He stepped through the entrance, and it didn't take long for him to see what he was hoping for. All along the walls of this mine was none other than prismatic Oregon. He figured that was what they were talking about, but needed to see it for himself. Ainz also knew now what they lacked that Nazarick did not: proper gloves and extraction equipment. Prismatic ore needed to be mined and handled using crystal tools and crystalline gloves until it was refined into an ingot. Ainz doubted anyone in the Draconic Kingdom would possess such equipment. There was enough of it here for anything Nazarick could ever need. He knew the chief blacksmith would have a heart attack, if he had a heart, when he saw this mine. The golem would no doubt be over the moon happy to get more of the Oregon. He never protested, but he could tell it pained the blacksmith every time Ainz had him make something out of prismatic ore. Greater teleportation. Ainz appeared back in the conference room right where he was before he stepped through the gate. He had to suppress his chuckle again at Drawdalin and Yura's look of surprise when he reappeared. I believe the mine would be useful to the Psycho Kingdom once my personal blacksmith has had a look at it. So here is my offer. Draudelin's look of relief at news of the mine was quickly covered with her queenly mask as she gave all her attention to Ainz. If you agree that we have exclusive rights to that mine, and any other with the same, or if they are found in the Draconic Kingdom as well as pledge fealty as a vassal kingdom, I believe we can agree to an alliance with each other. We should talk ABO dash. If we can agree to allow me to visit your capital, so I may spend some time with your queens and yourself to see how you rule, I agree to that deal. Yura wanted to try and get it down a bit if possible, but it seemed Draudelin wasn't having that. She apparently had her own agenda. Ainz didn't chuckle, but he did half smile at Draudelin. He knew exactly why she wanted to visit. The woman was not subtle in her appreciation of Ainz. I believe we have a deal, Draudelin. Ainz reaches across the table to shake the woman's hand, and she practically lunges to take his. He couldn't suppress the chuckle this time, but neither could Draudelin. She also felt something much different than a simple smile. When Draudelin touched his hand, she was overwhelmed with the power she felt inside him. She could sense a great deal of it from his presence, but it was only a fraction of what he truly held. She was extremely excited now, and it wasn't only because she now had a very strong ally in Ainz Gown. I hope for a very long and fruitful alliance between us, Ainz. Ainz hoped Taylar and Albedo were off doing something else and not watching this interaction. She'd be setting herself way back if those two were watching her shamelessly undress him with her eyes and flirt with him like this after they said no to a marriage. Usually, we'd have a celebration for such an alliance, but I'm assuming you'd rather we deal with your beastmen problem first and foremost? I would. We have plenty of time to plant the seeds of our alliance. But now, I believe we should deal with the weeds first. Ainz might be in trouble by the time he returns to Nazarick because he is starting to like this incredibly flirty back and forth with Draudelin. The woman was clever with her flirtations, and they fit perfectly, so she could play innocent. Although, her tone certainly betrayed the real meaning of her words. We have strong seeds in the Psycho Kingdom to help relieve the burden you currently feel. Yep, Ainz was definitely in trouble if those two were watching. Could you show me your current situation on the map? I'd like to see what will be needed to bring you the best aid possible. Why don't we head to the war room? I'd like to get this handle as soon as possible as well. I'm in dire need to have my burdens lifted. Ainz was having a little too much fun with this, so he simply nodded his head instead of responding. He'd rather not get a beatdown from his queens or Albedo when he went back to Nazarick shortly. Once they entered the war room, which was right across from the conference room, Ainz noticed there were several people already in here. He recognized some of them, but didn't know them all. It was 3 men and 1 woman, but he already knew 3 of the 4. When Draudelin introduced him as their new king, he wanted to laugh at the implication. Draudelin seemed to enjoy it as well, as she let them believe they were to marry for a little longer than she should have before telling them of the deal they just made. As they went over the situation, Ainz could see that while Draudelin was being a little too flirty when she said it, she really was in dire need of someone to lift her burdens. The beast men were definitely going to take over this country. It wasn't a question anymore of if, but when. That was, of course, before Ainz showed up and made an alliance with Queen Draudelin. Now, the beast men could only be described as one word: fucked. All of the beastmen's strength was concentrated on the 3 cities they had already taken, and they would send out raiding parties for food from there. Everyone else had a name for what the beast men called their food, humans. It should make it rather easy to wrap this up quickly if they only had to worry about 3 cities and the occasional scout or raiding party that was out when they showed up. Ainz learned enough about the beast men to start getting excited. The weakest beast men races were at least twice as strong as a human. The strongest of them were upwards of 20 times stronger, like bearkin. Then there were those like the tigerkin who were only about 10 times stronger but also 10 times faster than a human. Ainz knew he'd need to kill quite a few beastmen to get his point across, but hoped he didn't have to exterminate all of them. A battalion of beastmen added to his army sounded absolutely fantastic to him. Gather everyone you wish to observe the battle. Send word to those you need to hold the cities after we are done, and meet me in the courtyard in an hour. I shall return to Nazareth and bring some of our soldiers. They all nod their heads in agreement. Even Drawdalin skipped the recent flirting and nodded. Ainz opened a gate to gather those who would deal with the beast men and stepped inside. True to his word, exactly an hour later, another gate opened in the courtyard outside the palace. To say everyone around was stunned to see what came through the gate did not do their thought processes justice. When King Ainz said he was going to retrieve his soldiers for the upcoming battle, no one thought he would reappear with the 6 most beautiful maids any of them had ever seen, or the most beautiful woman any of them had ever laid eyes on. Of course, none of them knew the Pleiades could wipe out their whole country if they so desired. They certainly didn't know that Albedo was, for all intents and purposes, stronger than Ainz was. No, they knew none of this, but they would soon find that out. The people of the Draconic Kingdom were not the only ones in for a surprise, though. Right as Ainz was about to introduce all those he brought with him, a roar ripped through the air that drew everyone's attention. Ainz looked toward the roar and saw a fairly large dragon descending from the sky. It looked to be a few hundred feet long, and Ainz could hazard a guess as to which dragon lord this was. They had learned a decent amount about the Dragon Lords after Oriole had spied on the Platinum Dragon Lord. The fool obviously thought too much of his abilities and didn't realize they only let him watch the Battle of the Katsa Plains so they could figure out exactly where he was spying on them from. The dragons in this new world seemed to act like the dragons Ainz knew about from most fantasy games. Arrogant, superior, and they all thought they were better than most. At least, that is what it seemed like to Ainz. From the descriptions they gathered, this had to be the Brightness Dragon Lord. Ainz was 99% certain that was the case, but when he heard Drawdalin whisper to herself, "Why is grandfather here?" he knew his guess was true. As the dragon was about to land, a bright flash blinded nearly everyone. It didn't affect those like Ainz, though, and he watched as the large dragon turned into a man just before landing on the ground. The human form of the Brightness Dragon Lord was fairly handsome. He had hair as white as snow, the same blue eyes Drawdalin had, and he was just as tall as Ainz was. Ainz did notice the Dragon Lord barely looked at any but him. He had a good idea why, but he was just as curious as Drawdalin why the Brightness Dragon Lord decided to make an appearance. He didn't have to wait long to find out, though. "Granddaughter, what is this thing doing in my kingdom?" Drawdalin wanted to say something, but couldn't figure out what to say to that question. She hadn't seen her grandfather in a very long time, and this was not like him at all. Her grandfather was unlike most dragon lords. He was more scholar than anything. It seemed words did not fail Ainz, though, and Drawdalin realized he knew more about her grandfather than she thought. "This thing has a name, Dragon Lord." "I thought the Dragon Lord known to be more scholarly than the rest would understand common courtesy, but I suppose proper manners must have been a book you skipped over." "You dare speak to me like that? I am Dash." I know exactly who you are, Brightness Dragon Lord, but you don't seem to realize the situation you walked into. You came here, roaring like you owned the place, then proceeded to be hostile to the only person who has come to save this nation from being overrun by the beast men. The Brightness Dragon Lord looked offended and a little pissed at Ain's words. He looked to his granddaughter to see if she would step in and say something, but to his dismay, she didn't look like she was going to stop this thing from Yggdrasil speaking his mind. Don't look at her for answers, Dragon. I'm right here, and the one speaking to you. If you want to come at me like an enemy, I'll make the situation very clear to you. Ainz motions to Drawdalin. I have agreed upon an alliance with Queen Drawdalin. The first thing we will accomplish with this alliance is ridding this country of its beast men problem. You came here claiming this was your kingdom. However, you have stood by and done nothing while tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of this country's men, women, and children were slaughtered by invaders. Unless, of course, if that was your plan, let them come to the brink of collapse before you swooped in and saved the day. The Dragon Lord didn't answer, and that was just as good as confirming it was true. Ainz wasn't going to let this opportunity pass him by. In truth, the Brightness Dragon Lord was going to bear the brunt of the anger he held toward the Platinum Dragon Lord for always trying to spy on them. It does make sense. You haven't made an appearance in this kingdom in how long? Now, you show up when they finally make an alliance with a country that can save them? I must be stealing your glory. It is the only thing that makes sense. Ainz tried very hard, but he couldn't keep the smirk off his face when looking at the Brightness Dragon Lord. He could tell he was pissing the dude off something fierce, and he was loving every minute of it. If it is instead your purpose to come and take the throne from Queen Drawdalin, well then, that would pose another set of problems for you. While you may have founded this country, you surrendered the throne a long time ago. Since part of my agreement with Drawdalin is that she retains her position as queen, I'd have to declare war on anyone who comes to usurp her off her rightful throne, no matter who or what that usurper was. Ainz made sure to direct some of his power at the Brightness Dragon Lord. He knew that one-on-one, this dragon stood no chance against him. All the Dragon Lords would need to team up to take him on, and Albedo was only about 10 feet away from him. She'd kill him just as fast as Ainz could. The way I see it, you have a few choices available to you. You could stop acting all high and mighty and join us in celebrating our new alliance. You could declare your intent to usurp Queen Drawdalin, and I will allow you to leave to gather your forces, since I would then declare war on you. Or we could simply have it out here and now, me versus you, and I could quickly put an end to your petty grudge. Ainz watched as a number of emotions played out over the Dragon Lord's face. He figured a being that lived so long would be better at masking his emotions. He only had a few months of practice with it, and it was fairly easy. Although, Ainz found it hard to mask the same emotion the dragon was: rage. While several emotions crossed the Dragon Lord's face, rage was the most frequent. It took the dragon a few minutes, but he finally made his decision and voiced it. You may have your alliance, but I want no part in this. The Brightness Dragon Lord directs his gaze at Drawdalin. Do not come crawling to me when this blows up in your face. He sprouts 2 dragon wings in his humanoid form and takes off into the sky. Ainz was a little grateful for that. He had no idea they could grow wings like that in any form other than their dragon form. Seabass certainly couldn't. I can't believe why you threaten him like that. Ainz turns to the disbelieving voice of Drawdalin. He hadn't noticed it before, but everyone had shrunken back in fear with the exception of Drawdalin and those from Nazarick. The dragon was so weak compared to him, he completely forgot it would be an overwhelming presence to just about everyone else here. Well, we agreed upon an alliance, and I am a man of my word. Plus, it bothers me when those that are that weak try to threaten me. I suppose in trying to alleviate most from feeling my true power, those that have some power believe themselves capable of threatening me. Your true power? Yes, I wear a ring to suppress it. I suppose I could show you if you like. I have gotten much better at controlling it.
Okay.
Drawdalin couldn't think of anything more to say. She thought she sensed his true power when they shook hands. Apparently, that wasn't even the full extent of it, and now she was doubly curious. Ainz figured there was no harm in it. Seabass had done a very good job teaching all of them how to control their auras of power. If he could teach Albedo to control her ridiculously powerful one, he could teach any of them. Ainz reached for the ring on his right index finger and took a hold of it. He looked to Drawdalin to let her know to be ready. When he plucked the ring from his finger, Drawdalin stumbled a few steps back from the power she sensed.
Actually, shit.
Ainz wanted to laugh at Drawdalin saying that. It truly wasn't his entire power, just what he could project. He didn't though because he noticed everyone kneeling now. It must have just been a natural reaction to showing his power humans had or something. He was making sure his aura didn't touch any of them, so it had to be the only explanation. Once he returned the ring to his finger, everyone stayed kneeling and simply looked at him in awe. It was a little strange even after all this time. Over half his country saw him as some sort of god, and all these stares still unnerved him. Well, now that is out of the way. Ainz couldn't help but grin. Shall we go get rid of your beastmen problem now? Oh, of course. Ainz could tell Drawdalin was still shocked by how powerful he truly was. He was sure she would have been a little more cautious or hesitant to step through the open gate if she were paying enough attention. He was grateful she wasn't, as it made all those from the Draconic Kingdom follow her through without much hesitation. When they all emerged from the gate, they stood in front of a city that was probably beautiful at some point. That was no longer the case. The walls had obviously been heavily damaged. They were still intact enough for defensive purposes, but they wouldn't hold out long without proper maintenance and repair. There was a gate. Ainz could tell from this far away, but it looked put together. Ainz didn't believe it would hold up to a battering ram many times. The smell of blood and death was heavy in the air as well. Ainz wasn't surprised by that. The beastmen used humans as food. I'm ashamed of what has become of Ygritte. Ainz was puzzled by what Drawdalin meant by that. It was true, it wasn't much to look at now. However, he could tell it used to be a pretty good-looking city. It would get there again after this was all over. Don't worry, we will return it to what it once was. Of that, I have no doubt, Your Majesty. It seems the sight of this city took all the flirting out of Drawdalin. It still pains me to see such a sight. Ygritte is draconic, for ancient. This is the oldest city in the Draconic Kingdom and was the site of our capital when my grandfather first founded this kingdom. It will be yours once more and back to looking beautiful before you even realize it. Ainz gave her shoulder a light squeeze before turning to look behind him. Pleiades, please go alert the leader of this city. I wish to parley with him. As you command, Your Majesty. All six quickly bowed and answered Ainz before heading off toward the city gate. He thought their perfectly synced responses would diminish as they started acting more and more like individuals, but they hadn't. He could tell Drawdalin wanted to say something, and she finally did when the Pleiades had almost made it to the gate. Are you sure they will be all right, Your Majesty? Don't worry about the Pleiades, Queen Drawdalin. They are much more than they appear to be. Ainz couldn't help the smirk on his lips. The people of this world held the strangest beliefs in who was vulnerable and who wasn't. Most thought that since the Pleiades were so pretty and mostly proper, they were weak. This is usually applied to Taylar and Albedo as well. Those two looked like they were born to care for others and wouldn't hurt a fly. Even with Albedo's demonic features, it didn't diminish those beliefs. He knew that was partially true. Taylar and Albedo cared a great deal for a lot of people. That didn't mean they weren't great at pretending to care about a lot of people while still having the power to wipe them from existence, if they so desired. It didn't take long for the Pleiades to come walking back toward their group. Ainz could see the gate opening behind them, and much more than just their leader coming out of it. By the looks of it, just about every beast man in this city was coming out of the gate. Their leader does not wish to speak, Your Majesty. That's all he had to say, Yuri? His filthy words do not deserve to grace your ears, my king. You know that means you have to tell me what he said, right? Yuri and the other Pleiades seemed resigned to that. Ainz watched Yuri nod her head, then finally speak. He said this was the only chance he would give my king to flee. If he did not, he would have his army capture all of us, then take each of the women in front of my king before allowing his soldiers to eat us alive. Then he would remove your head and send it back where we came from as a warning to others that this was now part of the Beastmen kingdom. When Yuri finished, she, along with the rest of the Pleiades and Albedo, expected to see pure rage take over their great king. He never did respond well to threats against those from Nazarick, but they were all surprised to see nothing on his face. He didn't look enraged or angry. In fact, it didn't look like it affected him at all. All he said was an emotionless, I see. Silent, greater teleport. Ainz disappeared, and it caught everyone off guard. Their shock was short-lived as Ainz reappeared right in the same spot, but everyone heard the massive thud and saw Ainz lift his leg. When they looked down, there were two beastmen being held down by his foot in the back of their necks. It was in the perfect location to hold them both down with one on top of the other, but their heads were angled so they could see what was going on in front of them. Albedo, it is time this world witnessed your power. As you command, my king. Albedo went to step past everyone and deal with this army for her love. She was excited. He didn't want her to hold back. There was an attack she had wanted to test out for some time, but it was too devastating to test anywhere, even Nazarick. She didn't make it far, though, before Ainz's voice stopped her in her tracks. Albedo. Ainz didn't continue until she faced him. None survive. Her only answer was a smile and nod of the head. She was glad for such orders. She wasn't sure any would survive this one attack. To begin with, it seemed those from the Draconic Kingdom weren't too keen on his plan of attack, though. Your Majesty. It was the Prime Minister speaking this time. Surely she cannot fight those beastmen on her own. There has to be 10,000 of them. Sit back and enjoy the show, Prime Minister Yura. Ainz smirked at the man before turning to the Pleiades. So, what do you think, Pleiades? How long will it take Albedo to deal with the Beastmen army here? Ainz was glad to see them looking at each other. It seemed they were silently communicating their personal decisions. When they answered in sync, it didn't surprise him, but their answer did make him chuckle. One attack, Your Majesty. You all seem very confident in that. Lady Albedo has spent more time with us now that she resides in the royal wing. She accompanies exalted Queen Albedo quite frequently, and she has expressed her desire to try an attack she cannot test, even in Nazarick. Oh. Now I'm even excited to see this. Ainz turned his attention back to Albedo, and she had already made it more than halfway to the beastmen. It seemed like the beastmen finally pulled out of their stupor when Albedo drew her sword. They all charged, but Albedo jumped in the air and made her wings of light to hover over the ground. She drew her sword to the side and swiped like she was trying to cut the charging army from side to side. Wave of annihilation. As Albedo's sword traveled from left to right across the charging army, the ground around them started erupting and disappearing. The representatives from the draconic kingdom that accompanied them had trouble staying on their feet. Only those from Nazareth stood calmly and watched. It sounded to everyone around as if the apocalypse had come. Large portions of earth were exploding from the ground. The ground was shaking so bad it was hard to stand, and the screams of death and agony could only be heard as a large dust cloud had formed where the beast men had charged from. Gust of wind. Ainz didn't feel like waiting for the dust to settle, so he cleared it away from himself after the screaming subsided. Ainz smiled at the proud look on Albedo's face when he saw her turn to him. The Pleiades looked equally as proud, probably because they guessed right. Everyone from the draconic kingdom could only stumble out one word. How. Every single beast man being utterly annihilated by one attack had shocked all of them too much it seemed. Only a long trench of destroyed earth remained. Ainz isn't sure who all asked that, since he heard it from a few of them, but he knew one was Queen Draudolin. He turned to her to answer her question. It's simple. That's the power of Nazareth. Ainz turned from Draudolin and headed toward Albedo. The moment she was close enough, he wrapped his arms around her, kissed her, and lifted her in the air. She was blushing, and it was adorable. Ainz set her down only to bop her lightly on the nose with the tip of his finger before giving her another smile and saying, "As soon as we find an empty, clean room in that city, I'm going to reward you for that." She blushed again, and Ainz loved seeing that once more. Her eyes were not so embarrassed, though, and her looking at him like that made him want to teleport away this moment. Unfortunately, there were things they needed to accomplish before all of that, so he simply took her hand and turned toward the others behind him. Now, that one on the bottom is the one that threatened us, correct, Yuri? It is, Your Majesty. Ainz walked over to the two beastmen. He had Yuri release the one on top, picked him up by the throat, and slammed him into the ground a few times. The thing was already bleeding from a number of places after the slams. Ainz wanted to do more, but the beast man needed to survive long enough to make it to its destination. You will go to Arades, where your king resides, and tell him what you have witnessed here. Tell him we are coming for him. Ainz released the beast man, and it took off limping as fast as it possibly could. Now he turned his attention to the one who threatened to rape the Pleiades, Albedo, and Draudolin. This man would regret his words for a long time. Lupus Regina, I will need your assistance for this one. As you command, Your Majesty. Ainz should find it strange that Lupus Regina being so excited to help him torture someone turned him on, but he certainly didn't. Lupus Regina always had this sultry tone no matter what she said, and he had bonded pretty deeply with Albedo while torturing the captain of the Black Scripture before they turned him into an undead. I'm going to make you regret ever thinking you could touch Albedo, one of the Pleiades, or Queen Draudolin. By the time I'm done with you, you'll wish your mother would have cut out your tongue at birth. Then, and only then, will your suffering at my hands end. Sijo never expected to be at the mercy of anyone before. There were few stronger than him, and none among the Lionkin clan. The monster in front of him, though, scared him to death. He knew this monster's words were not false. There was no bluffing Sijo could see, and it wasn't long before he was already regretting his words. But your suffering will only begin when I'm through with you. I'll let your words be known to all of those who reside in Nazareth, and any who wish to spend time with you shall be granted their request. You shall come to know all of Nazareth and pay for your words with enough pain to last you many, many lifetimes. I shall give you a little preview. Before all of Ainz's words could register in Sijo's mind, Ainz took a quick step toward him, grabbed his wrist, and yanked as hard as he could. Sijo couldn't hold back the scream of agony as the most intense pain he had ever felt shot through his left shoulder. When Sijo had finally noticed his missing left arm, he looked toward Ainz but never got to lay his eyes on him as something impacted his stomach. Sijo doubled over in pain as all the air left his body, and it was only seconds later that he was vomiting up all the contents of his stomach. If that wasn't enough pain for Sijo, when the last of his heaves left his body, he felt another impact on his lower back. The pain amplified immensely since his entire body was tense from vomiting. Sijo had no choice but to lay face first on the ground from the force of the blows. His face now down in a puddle of his own vomit as he felt 2 more blows on his back, each one higher than the last. At this point, Sijo was vomiting out blood. It was running from his mouth and ears, and he could see the black starting to take over his vision as he was having trouble breathing now. He was sure he had a punctured lung or some other painful injury because his whole body hurt. It wasn't until he felt a boot kick him over onto his back that he realized what Ainz was beating him with. If the no resistance from rolling over to his incredibly painful shoulder hadn't been enough to inform him, the fact that Ainz's old gown was hovering over him with Sijo's own arm gripped as a club gave it away. Sijo watched as Ainz tossed his arm to one of the maids, the one with the purple hair, before he bent down, grabbed Sijo by the throat, and picked him up right in front of Ainz. There was no denying the raw power of Ainz's old gown now. If being beaten by his own arm wasn't a good enough sign, the fact that this king was currently holding up a lionkin by his throat with one hand would definitely do the trick. That is just a taste of what your future shall be, Beastman. You are lucky we are in the presence of new allies, or I would make your preview much longer and much more painful. Ainz's grip grew tight on his throat, but right before Sijo passed out, Ainz dropped him in a heap at his feet. Ainz couldn't wait to get some more free time with this heap of trash, but that would have to wait. There were other, more pressing matters to attend to first. Lupus Regina, heal this filth, but do not regenerate his arm. And Toma, please enjoy your snack. Hanzo, watch over the prisoner. I plan to keep him company 1 or 2 more times before sending him off to Nazareth. As you command, Your Majesty. The Pleiades were in their always constant sync as both maids answered Ainz. It wasn't until he had given those command that he turned to look at the representatives from the Draconic Kingdom who accompanied them. It truly looked like they all wanted to be sick, with the exception of Queen Drawdalin. It looked as if Ainz losing his temper for a bit had Drawdalin forgetting her earlier unease at seeing her once proud city conquered. That flirty glint was back in her eye, but Ainz spoke before she could, to keep them on track. I am sure there is much you wish to check on in this city. He addresses Drawdalin before turning back to Yuri. Please take the Pleiades and ensure the city is secure, Yuri. We must wrap this up and move to our next city as quickly as we are able. Your will shall be done, my king. Yuri bowed and headed toward the Pleiades. It was less than a minute before he heard a couple of happy squeals, namely from Lupu and Intoma, about clearing the city, and all the Pleiades were off to complete their tasks. Ainz was tempted to summon some undead to help, but He liked to let the Pleiades kill as much shit as possible. They had figured out long ago that in this world, you gained experience from the most mundane of tasks. Even if it was very, very little, it was still experience. However, killing something, that gave more than anything else you could imagine. Even killing something well below your own power level was almost always more worth it than everyday experience, as Ainz, Taylar, and Albedo called it. There were rare exceptions, Ashrin being the one that stands out the most. Perhaps Enri as well. Ashrin received a pretty insane amount of experience after giving sermons they noticed. Preaching in their temple for an hour during service to Ashrin was the equivalent of fighting a creature of her exact level. That pace had eventually slowed down when she leveled a few times, but it started to creep back up when she converted more and more people, and the number of people attending the service increased. She had gained more experience than anyone they had kept an eye on, and that was something. They had never given any of the elves experience tomes as they had to Enri and Fyria, or even the Swords of Darkness. They had given them new gear, but nothing more than that. So seeing Ashrin catch up to the Swords of Darkness already was astounding. They were not planning on giving her one for quite some time either. More war was certainly on the horizon, and they would try to get her involved somehow. Putting her on a battlefield was not something they wanted to do, but having her travel with the army could be very, very effective for multiple reasons. Ainz had only waited until the Pleiades had disappeared through the front gate before he started walking toward the city. Ainz had left his new lionkin friend with a Hanzo, so he wasn't worried about that. If there were any surviving beastmen in there, he was sure Intoma was enjoying a hearty dinner right now. Ainz always fought the urge to go kill everything himself, but he knew that would be wasteful. He had checked over and over again, but his experience bar hadn't budged an inch. No matter how bored he was getting, he had to let the Pleiades or anyone not at level 100 kill most of the things they needed to eliminate. It wasn't as though he didn't get to kill things, it just wasn't as often as he liked. It was probably the reason he was so hostile toward the Brightness Dragon Lord earlier. Not that he would have given Ainz much of a fight. Ainz would have been surprised if the Dragon Lord lasted longer than a minute against him. Ainz was sure Albedo would have killed him in one strike. Ainz strolled through the front gate with Albedo at his side and finally got a decent look at the city from the inside. It honestly wasn't in as bad a shape as he believed it would be. He expected a lot of rubble and destroyed buildings, but he saw almost none of that. There was certainly damage to a good number of buildings, but none of the damage was very catastrophic. It wouldn't take much to repair almost all of the city. It was very surprising after seeing the wall. That thing was going to take some work. There was, however, an incredible amount of blood. There were not many bodies, but the blood was everywhere. Ainz knew these beastmen ate humans, so that wasn't surprising. It honestly made him curious if they ate it first or stored it somewhere, and how they accomplished such a thing. At this point, Ainz didn't even bother wondering if he should be comfortable thinking all these people dying only got him curious instead of sad. His number of kills in this new world already surpassed 100,000. It would be a little hypocritical to pretend he cared about a few thousand humans. Ainz had only made it a quarter of the way into the city before Yuri made another appearance with the rest of the Pleiades. He was surprised they cleared it so quickly, but they did have the help of several Hanzos and shadow demons, so it shouldn't have surprised him that much. The city is clear of beastmen, my king. A more thorough sweep should be conducted, for your safety, your majesty, but the city is yours. Excellent work, Yuri. Were there many beastmen still within the city? Only a couple of hundred, your majesty. They have all been dealt with. Cleanup has started? Ainz did not need to say more than that for Yuri to understand. He couldn't well ask in front of all these draconic kingdom representatives if the bodies were being transported to Nazareth for him to turn into undead. It is already underway, Your Majesty. Good. Find a secure, private, and clean room for me. I need to have a discussion with Albedo, where we can't be disturbed. Ainz ignores the smirk on Yuri's lips and only acknowledges the nod before turning to the approaching party. Queen Draudolin, Yuri has informed me the city is secure. You may want to have your troops do a more thorough search when they arrive, though. The Pleiades have only cleared the obvious areas and most of the buildings. There could be some beastmen still hiding, so better safe than sorry. I believe that is a great idea, Your Majesty. Securing the city is our #1 priority. We also need to see how many of our people survived the assault and where they are currently being held if anyone made it out of this occupation alive. Ainz could tell Draudolin was happy to have had her city returned to her rule, but looked almost frightened at what she would find out when she looked to see how many in this city survived. Ainz didn't know the population of this city before, but he guessed when he gave Draudolin this next piece of information, it would tell him a great deal about how many citizens this city truly lost. That may be a little easier than you suspect, Your Majesty. Ainz elaborates when Draudolin raises a brow at him to continue. The Pleiades have found a number of prisoners, and most seem to be crammed into 3 locations. They weren't able to get an accurate count of all the people as there were too many for a quick count, but by their estimation, there are a couple of 100,000 people being held in what appears to be an arena, a warehouse, and on one of the large farms just inside the city. When Ainz sees Draudolin visibly relax, he had a good idea that many more people survived than Draudolin believed would. Ainz was grateful for that. Buildings could be easily rebuilt, roads repaired, businesses reopened, and food given to any who needed it. However, replacing people wasn't nearly as easy. All the buildings, jobs, and food in the world would mean nothing without the people needed to maintenance them, work, or eat the food. He might be able to change someone's race and create undead or angels, but he couldn't snap his fingers and create a being from nothing. They needed people more than anything in this kingdom, regardless of all the other aid they would need. I thank you, Your Majesty, for all you have done already for our alliance. And please, convey my appreciation to your Pleiades and Ambassador Albedo for all of their aid as well. It would have taken us months and thousands of lives to retake this city which you and your subordinates took over in only hours. Think nothing of it, Queen Draudolin. Part of our agreement is stopping the Beastmen invasion of your nation, and we will come through on our end of that deal. While I would love to speak with you some more, I have a feeling it is going to take longer to get this city in order than I planned on spending here. Your troops have begun to arrive, so please give them some direction. I need to speak with my subordinates. I'll leave you to tend to the city. Ainz's words were proven true many times over. Ainz only wanted to be in the city for a few hours before moving on to the next one, but they ended up needing to stay for almost a week, 5 days to be exact. Ainz did receive regular reports from Queen Draudolin and her advisors, and he also walked around the city as much as possible so the people here could see who saved them and get used to his presence. He also managed to sneak away at least once a day to spend some time with Taylar and Albedo. He was reluctant to leave each time, as Albedo looked nearly ready to pop. Albedo, however, always waved off his concerns and sent him back to the Draconic Kingdom. He probably would have protested harder had it not been for her words to him. What better present for our children than another kingdom, my love? Ainz had half a mind to take over the other 3 cities by himself and possibly make a quick stop in the Dwarven Kingdom to add them to their list of vassals. In truth, it also gave that beast man they let live time to make it to the city where their king was holding up in. If the beast man actually made it that far, It wouldn't surprise Ainz if the man never made it. Ainz did slam him off the ground far harder than he needed to. Luckily for Ainz, he managed to make it through all 5 days without going off on his own. He was sure it had everything to do with Taylar, Albedo, and Rubido being constant distractions for him. He was sure his impatience would have worn thin by now without them. It also gave him time to plan for the next city. He wasn't going to change much in terms of strategy, but he was sure it would be even more of a spectacle than Rubido's one-attack finisher if it turned into a battle, as the last one did. Raw power was all well and good, but Ainz liked a show included in that. It made it more memorable in his opinion. Ainz had learned from Queen Draudolin that she would be leaving Lady Myra in charge of a grit while they headed to the next city, Darave. Lady Myra had been the one noble he knew almost nothing about when he first came here. It didn't take long before he remedied that problem. Not only did he talk to her a few times himself, but Ainz had Oriol do a little investigating with some Hanzos as well. Ainz was pleasantly surprised to find the woman knew her stuff and was respected and trusted to be loyal by Queen Draudolin. Now, Ainz found himself outside the walls of the Draconic Kingdom city of Darave. According to Queen Draudolin, Darave meant young and draconic, and Ainz could tell why they named this city as such. It wasn't nearly the size of a jurt, and Ainz could tell it was still expanding compared to the other 2 cities he visited so far in the Draconic Kingdom. This city was maybe half the size of a jurt and the capital of the Draconic Kingdom. The buildings weren't nearly as tall or ornate as the other 2 cities either. Darave sounded like a very appropriate name after Ainz took in the city from the outside. Even if the city was young, Ainz could tell the walls were strong, just like a jurt. Not that it would matter to his troops, but it would take another army a considerable amount of effort to breach the city. It made him wonder exactly how the beastmen were able to accomplish such a thing. The walls were even bigger and thicker than a grit, but Ainz learned it was the first city to fall to the beastmen. Ainz was going to send the Pleiades once more to do the diplomatic thing, but he decided it was time he did more than just stand around giving orders. He wasn't going to get to kill anything yet again, so he decided it would be him instead of Yuri he sent to parley. Plus, Yuri wasn't here at the moment. Ainz could see everyone staring at him, waiting for him to do something, but he was waiting for something himself. Well, really, someone or someone's. While he was very happy with Rubido decimating the other forces with one attack, he also knew she was level 100, so she got no experience from doing that. It wasn't truly a waste of experience, since the Draconic Kingdom got a first-hand glimpse of Rubido's power, but he couldn't have her do that again. If he did, it would be a waste of perfectly good experience there for the taking. He had already done that by wanting to surprise Rubido and not remembering to give her the gloves that would absorb the experience. Finally, the gate opened he had been waiting for, and he turned to greet those who would be carrying out his next attack if negotiations went south at the city. Yuri was the first one out as usual, and the rest came out in the same order they always did. Lupus Regina was followed by Narbril Gamma, Solution, CZ Delta, and then Entoma. Ainz was waiting for the last group. Ooshi and Uka stepped through after the Pleiades had come through, but Ainz was surprised who came out after them. He did not expect to see Swear step through the gate after Uka and Ooshi. The last one through, Oriol, was who he expected to see in place of Swear. He knew he could ask Swear why she was here, as the Pleiades did battle, so he concentrated on his beautiful daughter after the gate closed. This would be the first time Oriol took part in a battle in person. She had commanded and buffed plenty of battles so far, but always from the safety of the Cherry Blossom Sanctuary. Honestly, Ainz would prefer her to never leave the place unless she was with himself, his queens, or Rubido, but also knew he couldn't coddle her. Too much. Since she was here to actually do battle and not simply command her unit, Ainz had made one demand and wouldn't budge on it. If everyone didn't agree, she wouldn't be here right now. That demand was the new armor Oriole found herself wearing. Normally, Oriole wore a traditional shrine maiden outfit, a red hakama, trousers, and a white haori jacket. While her current outfit did somewhat resemble her normal attire, it was also completely different. Her pants were still red, but they were much tighter. Instead of the smooth red fabric, everyone could see they were made of tiny red scales. There were also pitch black shin plates and overlapping pitch black plates running up her thighs. Her jacket was white as well. It also wasn't smooth material, but made of tiny white scales. There were overlapping plates on her shoulders, but they were a bright white instead of black like the ones on her legs. Two long chains hung from the end of her shoulder armor and connected to each side of her haori to hold it in place. Ainz could see Oriole's wakizashi poking out from behind her. She couldn't help herself when she started her combat training. She started wearing it just like her mother instead of on her hip as she did before. Oriole was also wearing black scaled boots with white and red trim instead of her normal sandals. She looked like a cross between a ninja and a samurai to Ainz. It was kind of fitting in Ainz's mind. Her hair was even slightly different. Oriole wore it down when they first came, but started wearing a braid after she met Henry. Oriole's hair was in a braid, but a very intricate set of them instead of one. If Ainz hadn't seen Albedo do it himself, he would have assumed Claire used some type of cosmetic magic to create this thing. Albedo braided Oriole's hair into 21 separate braids. She was going to form it into a crown, but Oriole didn't want that. Albedo instead turned those 21 braids into 3 braids holding 7 together, and then braided the 3 braids into one braid that weaved down Oriole's back. Ainz didn't even have the words to describe the type of pattern this put in Oriole's hair. It was intricate enough that if he stared at it for too long, he'd start to get dizzy. It was the craziest thing he'd seen, and he'd summoned death itself to kill people for him. Father. Oriole bowed to him the moment the gate closed, and everyone who came with her followed suit. Ainz couldn't get her to budge on the bowing since she insisted she must do it for her first appearance in front of the Draconic Kingdom, but he also wouldn't budge on the name. The last person he wanted to hear Your Majesty, or some other such nonsense, come from was Oriole. Daughter. Ainz stepped forward and hugged her before she could protest. He even dropped a kiss on top of her head before he stepped back. It was plain to see on her face she was unhappy with him. Father, please stop embarrassing me. Oriole only whispered that loud enough for Ainz to hear, but the incredulous tone came through loud and clear. Ainz couldn't help but chuckle a bit and completely ignore Oriole's pleas. She definitely gets her courtly manner from her mother's. Ainz would never do anything formal in his life if he could get away with it. Unfortunately, he had something formal he had to do right now, so he turned toward the representatives from the Draconic Kingdom. Queen Draudelin, Lord and ladies representing the Draconic Kingdom, allow me to introduce you to my daughter, Princess Oriole. Princess. Every time Ainz says that he sees Oriole cringe, and he is starting to enjoy these formal introductions. This is Queen Draudelin of the Draconic Kingdom and the Lord and ladies who have come to represent their kingdom. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Your Majesty, noble lords and ladies. Oriole was as nice and cordial as ever, but Ainz didn't miss the extra dressing down she gave Queen Draudelin. No doubt Taylar or Albedo had something to do with that, but he'd stay out of that unless she planned on killing her. Ainz bid them farewell to go and try to start negotiations with the leader of the beast men in the city. He knew Oriole would be fine with the other nobles. She was a much better diplomat than himself or Taylar. The only person who seemed to outshine Oriole in that department was Albedo, but that came as no surprise. Plus, Albedo was teaching her, so she'd probably surpass her soon enough. When Ainz was a few hundred feet from the front gate, he pulled out a little white flag from his inventory and waved it in the air a few times before putting it away once more. He hoped that did the trick, and it worked faster than he believed it would. It was only moments after he put it back in his inventory that the front gates opened, and he saw a small party riding out. Ainz assumed the one in the middle was the leader of this unit of their army. Unlike the last city that had a lionkin in charge, this beast man looked to be of the apekin variety. It was honestly a little funny to see it riding a horse, but the horse looked to be handling the very large apekin rather well. He was flanked by two smaller apekin on either side and two pantherkin behind them. I am Grudel, chief of the strongest of the Beastmen clan, the Apekin. You are the one called Ainz, the monster who tortured our brethren before sending him off injured to die. At first, Ainz wondered how this apekin knew about him torturing that lionkin, but then he realized he was talking about the other lionkin. Now, he wasn't too concerned about giving orders to find a spy and a jert. He simply had to clear up the misunderstanding. I am the exalted king of the Psycho Kingdom, Ainz Olgaun. However, I did not torture your kin. I simply gave him a lesson in pain and slammed him off the ground a few times before sending him on his way. You think that scares us, Apekin? Well, you have obviously been told what happened to your other unit when they refused to kneel before their new king. Do you truly wish for you and your men to experience a similar ending? Ainz thought he might have gotten through to this apekin based on the looks the others around him were giving him. Ainz wasn't sure if it was because he said that so definitively, said it so calmly, more like a fact, or if some of them could sense just how powerful he was. However, either this Grudel didn't care for their opinions, or didn't figure any of that out himself. You shall witness a much stronger fight from the Apekin and those under my command in this city, false king. This is your one chance to flee and avoid embarrassment at my hands. Grudel didn't even give Ainz the chance to answer. He simply spun his horse and rode toward the gate, the rest of his lackeys in tow. Ainz was a little stunned for a moment. He didn't intend for this city to get his warning, but they apparently had. He hoped it was because that lionkin made it to Arades and the king sent a messenger here. It would be very upsetting to learn that lionkin came here instead, if that was the case. Now, he was also stunned at this Apekin's stupidity. It was true, he didn't think they would surrender just from asking, but the Apekin had to have heard what happened to the other city. All the Apekin did was sign a death certificate for every beast man in this city. When he finally shook his head in disbelief, he was about to turn to go back to the rest of the group when he heard something from behind the walls. His incredible hearing allowed him to hear someone shout fire at the top of their lungs before he saw them coming. Ainz then heard the sound of trebuchets, ballista, bows, crossbows, spears, javelins, and many other ranged weapons being fired, slung, or thrown. He looked up in amusement as a wall of ranged projectiles came from behind and on top of the wall toward his position. It reminded him of a scene from a movie he had seen when he was younger. It wasn't quite as bad because the sun wasn't being completely blocked out, but it was pretty close. There were only small traces of light filtering through the wall of ranged projectiles. Ainz wasn't deterred. He opened his arms wide and smirked toward the wall as he was impacted by thousands of projectiles. The ballista bolts came first. Each one was almost as tall as Ainz, but they harmlessly bounced off of him and fell to the ground. The regular bolts and arrows came next. They had even less of an effect on Ainz and rattled to the ground beside him. Then the last of the volley came, and Ainz was excited to see how this worked. Large boulders came crashing down on him from above. There had to be nearly 20 of them by Ainz's count. Each one slammed into him with tremendous force after being hurled by the trebuchets. They caused a dirt and dust cloud large enough to obscure Ainz from everyone's sight. Queen Draudelin and all the nobles from the Draconic Kingdom were standing there with their jaws open. They couldn't believe that Ainz would just stand there with his arms open and take on all those projectiles. All of those from Nazarick, the Pleiades, Oriole, Swear, and Albedo simply stood there waiting for the dust to settle. They all knew exactly what would appear when they had a clear line of sight once more, and they were proven correct when the dust did finally clear. Ainz was standing in the middle of a pile of arrows, bolts, spears, javelins, and small rocks. The boulders that impacted him simply broke apart into tiny little rocks. Ainz was half expecting to have to dig himself out of a pile of boulders, but was glad he didn't have to. He was, however, completely surrounded by all these ranged projectiles. Ainz spread his wings, jumped back a bit, and gave his wings a couple of flaps before landing just behind the pile of ammunition. Ainz had to smile a bit at the expressions he could see on the walls of the city coming from some of the beast men. Silent, dimensional move. Ainz didn't bother walking the few hundred feet back to his awaiting party. He simply appeared in the middle of the Pleiades. Ainz could see Oriole looking at him expectantly. He knew she was waiting for the order to attack, but Ainz had a surprise for his beautiful daughter. It made his smile grow as she stared at him. Father? Yes, Oriole? May we get ready to attack? The beast men are already moving into position themselves, Father. Ainz turned around and saw just that happening. Beast men were pouring out of the front gate and forming up into 3 separate units. He was at least a little happy to see this commander wasn't nearly as stupid as the other one had been. Instead of emptying every beast man in the city into one large unit, this commander had them separate into 3 different ones. Ainz could see they were even staggering their lines, so they couldn't be taken out in a single attack like the other beast men were. Not only that, but there was also plenty of beast men left on the wall, unlike the other city. It wouldn't make a difference, but he was glad to see some beast men had tactical minds. Ainz could certainly work with that when he spoke to the king of the beast men.
No, not yet.
I'm just waiting for your surprise. Oh, here they are. Ainz didn't even get to finish as a gate opened right next to himself and Oriole. The first one through the gate was someone that everyone in Nazarick had seen quite often over these last few months. She may have looked completely different, but her hair pulled back in her signature ponytail was a dead giveaway. Lena's made sure to show off that pretty face every opportunity she got nowadays. What Lena's was wearing, however, was new, not only to everyone who knew her, but also to most of Nazarick. They had been out on various assignments and had never laid eyes on Lena's new weapon or armor since she had received them. Other than Ainz, Albedo, Taylar, Oriole, and Cositus, none had seen what Lena's now proudly wore for all to see. Before, Lena's wielded a long spear with a larger than normal spearhead, but she no longer used a spear. She still used an oversized weapon, and this one was even larger than her previous one. However, it weighed a quarter of what her old spear did, even if it was almost 3 feet longer. Lena's held a specially crafted war scythe in her right hand as she stood before everyone. The entire shaft of her weapon was made of celestium. She had never heard of such a metal, but her queen told her it was a 70/30ths mixture of mithril and platinum. Lena's knew the shaft of her weapon alone could be sold for such an amount she wouldn't need to lift a finger for the rest of her life or her grandchildren's lives, but that wasn't the truly valuable metal on her war scythe. That distinction came from the curved blade at the end. It was shaped to look similar to a crescent moon, but a bit wider. It was sharpened on both sides and could be used to slice or impale at her leisure. What made it valuable, however, was the metal it was made from. The blade was as dark as a moonless, starless night and looked like it sucked in the light around it. Lena's could feel the power and malice radiating from the metal. It took her a few days to get used to having something of this magnitude on her person, but she knew she'd have to learn to get used to it when she was told it was made from or her king gained while in the underworld. Her king called it the abyss, but to Lena's, it sounded like a hell they sent those too terrible to go to normal hell to. The few times her king had told her of the monsters he encountered down there, Lena's had trouble sleeping that night. Lena swore she would guard her new weapon with her life when she was presented with it, and she intended to keep her word. Then, her queen had gone and surprised her again. Lena's would have been content simply guarding her queen the rest of her days to repay her. She had no idea why being so powerful were being so kind to and understanding of her. She knew from only being around for a few hours that her new king and queens rewarded loyalty more than any she had ever witnessed, but they took that to extremes in her eyes. She hadn't truly deserved this new weapon, regardless of Cocytus's praise of her combat training, but her king and queens did not stop there. The queen's surprise was a new set of armor to go along with her new weapon. Queen Taylar and Queen Albedo had said she needed to look the part while guarding them, but Lena's was still hesitant to accept even more from them. Lena's knew her weapon alone was more powerful than anything she had laid eyes on in this world before. She knew it was stronger and more valuable than all of Gazef Stronov's national treasures combined, but her new armor put even her weapon to shame. It was mostly black, like her previous armor, but that is where the similarities ended. She had shoulder pauldrons as before, but these were not bulky like her last ones. Her bracers, thigh guards, shin pads, and breastplate were exactly the same. Instead of those areas being bulkier to add more protection, they were just as thick as the rest of her armor, which wasn't very thick. While her armor covered her from neck to toes, it was fitted to mold to her body, like a glove. The only three places not completely covered were the insides of her forearms, her thighs, and her stomach. Lena's insisted on showing off a little skin no matter what armor they tried to get her to wear, so they believed she would like it more if they incorporated it into the design. Her greaves came up to just above her knees, and that is where her skin could be seen. From the tip of her toes, all the way up her legs till her knees were her black dragon scale boots Lena's absolutely loved. Queen Taylar had told her it was actually black dragon scales, but they were coated with adamantine dust to strengthen them even further. All the way from just above her knee to just below where her butt started was completely exposed skin. Her armor started from there again. It went straight up the rest of her thighs, over her hips, upper curves, and all the way to her neck. A small section was missing right where her navel was, and it exposed her toned stomach to the world. Ainz thought it was stupid to expose such an important area of her skin to attack, but Lena's was more like Taylar and Albedo in that sense. Where Ainz thought of nothing but safety, The women around him also seemed to take into account fashion too much for his liking. He'd prefer they all wear armor in the style of Albedo's, but he knew nothing about clothes, so he let it go. Who was he to tell a woman what looked good and protected them? Lena's also had a helmet, but rarely wore it. They made sure it didn't cover her face as they knew she wouldn't want to, but she didn't like wearing it very often. Ainz knew she'd put it on soon for her task. She might like looking good, but he knew she enjoyed living even more. There were small details of red and white all over her armor, and the crest of their new kingdom was right in the center in red with a white border. She was essentially the first ever knight protector of their kingdom since the rest of those around them wore the symbol of Nazareth on their respective outfits. As soon as Lena's had scanned to make sure it was safe, Ain's next surprise guest strode through the gate. Ainz and Lena's both knew she didn't have to check and make sure it was safe, but he was glad to see she did it regardless before Taylar stepped through the gate. Taylar had almost completely foregone the wearing of her normal Miko attire and went for much more formal dresses. Since her normal cosmetic dresses still had the defensive stats of level 30 to 60 armor, depending on the dress, she almost exclusively wore those nowadays. In her words, they made her look more like a queen. Ainz disagreed, and always would. Taylar could be wearing a burlap sack while covered in mud and still look like the queen of everything to Ainz. With that being said, he did enjoy everything she wore immensely, and today was no exception. If Ainz was correct, the one she wore today was from one of the elven holiday events they had in Yggdrasil. It was a forest green color and made of fairy silk. It looked a lot like satin but felt impossibly soft and smooth to the touch. The green fabric twisted around her waist and up toward her bust, hugging every womanly curve Taylar possessed. It covered a little more than necessary up to her bust and had no straps. It wrapped around her back but only went up a little higher than the small of her back while the rest was exposed skin. The fabric that went down her waist was much looser though. Just past her waist, the fabric flowed freely and went all the way down to her ankles. It, however, did not cover up everything. There was a very, very long slit in Taylar's dress that went up her left leg and didn't stop until it reached her hip. Every step she took toward Ainz with her left leg exposed every inch of that soft, smooth, silky flesh Ainz loved to taste. Her wavy, blonde hair looked as immaculate as ever as she strode toward him. Taylar didn't even acknowledge everyone kneeling as she made her way to Ainz. Her face lit up though as she stood next to him, and Ainz took her hand and kissed the back of it. "My queen." Shivers went down Taylar's spine straight to her loins at Ain's tone. She knew very well how much he appreciated what she was wearing with that tone. She looked forward to the end of this battle, so she could show him how much she loved his appreciation of her effort to look good for him. "My king." Ainz had much the same reaction Taylar did at her tone. Everyone around them should be grateful for two things then. One, the beast men were lining up to attack, and two, that Oriole was present. Ainz is sure if those two things weren't in the picture right now, he'd have taken Taylar in front of the Pleiades, Albedo, and every representative from the Draconic Kingdom. While it was fun to flirt and have witty banter back and forth with Queen Draudolin, she, unfortunately, could never get this kind of reaction from Ainz. While Ainz was surrounded by beautiful women, there was truly only a handful that could turn him into some feral creature hellbent on reproduction simply by looking at them. Ainz couldn't be disappointed when Taylar stepped past him after that brief welcome. Not only did she go right to Oriole to hug her as well, but Ainz also got a healthy look at her from behind. He had to look away quickly, though, or he might pounce on her. Ainz looked around as mother and daughter said their hellos, and wasn't surprised at what he saw. It hadn't just been the Pleiades that knelt, it was everyone present that wasn't Ainz or Oriole. Even Queen Draudolin was on her knees staring at Taylar. It wasn't the first time people reacted this way to his queen, and Ainz was sure it wouldn't be the last either. Please rise, everyone. There is no need to kneel on a battlefield. Taylar was as regal as ever as she commanded everyone to stand after saying hello to Oriole. Ainz wasn't under any illusions that he adapted to being more kingly faster than Taylar had become queenly. He was sure it had to do with her being famous back on Earth, which made her way more comfortable than Ainz when all eyes were on her. Even after everyone rose, she still looked like a true queen, and her words never wavered as she continued. I'd like to meet each of you, but as you can see, Taylar points toward the assembling beast men. We only have a minute or two before they start to attack. I'm sure we will have plenty of time to get to know one another after the battle has ended. Taylar turned back to Oriole as Ainz made his way to stand beside her. She reached into her inventory to pull out something as Ainz explained what she was doing to Oriole. The girl was certainly curious when she saw her mother pull a redwood-handled wakizashi she had never seen in her mother's possession out of her inventory. Cositis has told us you have become quite proficient in dual wielding. As such, your mother's, and I wanted to give you something to remember your first battle by. Taylar hands the weapon to Oriole while beaming at her daughter. Oriole's instinct was correct. It was a redwood handle, and she could tell it was made very carefully by the blacksmith of Nazareth. The quality was something that could only have come from there. Ainz wasn't finished, though. This one is crafted with beast men as your opponent in mind. It is much more devastating to them than it will be to any others. It is only something for you to use today, and then display somewhere. Oriole was normally very happy and energetic, but right now, she was moments away from a sobbing mess. Taylar didn't want to see her get like that before a fight, so she shifted the conversation toward a different topic to get her focused, as much as she didn't want to. Now, use it well and bring us back a victory today, daughter. Lena's here. Taylar puts her hand on Lena's shoulder. Is going to take care of the wall for you. Cositis has agreed that she is ready for such a thing, so adjust your strategy accordingly. Taylar steps toward Oriole, puts a hand on her shoulder, and drops a kiss right on top of her head. And good luck. Ainz steps up and does the same thing before taking his place next to Taylar. Oriole turned back toward the Pleiades, and Ainz can hear her changing the orders she issued previously. Shizu, I want you to lend Lena's a hand where she needs it, but I want you to focus on the priority targets I gave you first now. Once you have completed those two tasks, keep the beast men from spreading out too wide by picking off those at the edges, or those trying to flee. Oriole sees CZ acknowledge her new orders before turning back to the rest of them. Everyone else, nothing changes. Solution and Narbrol take the left unit. Narbrol, allow Solution most of the kills until your unit is prepped. Lupus, Regina, and Yuri, you will take the right unit. Lepu, allow Yuri the same space that Narbrol shall Solution. And Toma, you are in the middle with me. I will concentrate on the back, so they cannot flee while you get as many kills as you can, and remember what to do with the commander. Oriole sees everyone acknowledge their orders one after the other, and is satisfied they are ready to begin. It looks to be just in time as well because the beast men have finally lined up for an attack. Oriole had much the same thought Ainz had earlier. She was pleased to see the beast men in a staggered unit formation with ranged backup on the walls. This commander was much more competent than the one she watched in the other city. Not that it would make any difference. This was about to be a massacre. However, Oriole knew her father liked it flashy, so she would deliver on that as well. Oriole looked to her mother and nodded that she was ready. Taylar saw Lena's put on her helmet and acknowledge she was ready. Then Taylar put her hand on Lena's shoulder and said, "Greater teleportation." Most of all those who could see blinked a few times to see if their eyes had deceived them. No matter how many times they tried, Lena's had still disappeared while Taylar was standing right there. They only had a few seconds to process what had happened before everyone heard someone yell. Heavy explosion. The yell came from the far left tower of the city. Most of the beastmen, those from the Draconic Kingdom, and those from Nazarick looked in that direction. They all saw a blade slice through the stone from the inside a few inches before the door that led to the wall on the tower blew off the hinges. It flew down the wall at a high rate of speed before slamming into a beastman and knocking him off the wall. The door continued on and injured two more before it fell harmlessly over the wall. Seconds later, a blur of black and silver came shooting out of the doorway, and three beastmen lost their heads. Lena stood there, taunting the beastmen near her to come and try to take her out. 10 of them charged right at her, and she smirked that they were stupid enough to fall for it. Knight's charge. Lena's crouched low and sprung forward with her war scythe straight in front of her. She punched her way through the first 9 straight through the heart. The last beastman was so stunned Lena's had a moment to angle her war scythe up and thrust it through the bottom of his jaw and out the top of his head. She pulled out her weapon and looked down to see where any more were to kill when she, and everyone else, heard a loud bang ring through the air. Lena's heard something else behind her and turned to see what it was. A beast man was standing directly behind her with his warhammer raised in the air ready to strike her, but he was missing one key piece of his body, his head. Lena's looked over to see CZ Delta giving her a thumbs up as the dead beastman's body fell off the wall. CZ looked down at the units, and the bang rang through the air once more. Grudel watched as the human was about to be stopped before her rampage could really begin, only for a soldier's head to explode. When he turned toward the sound, he didn't even get all the way around when he saw his second in command's head exploded as well. As he screamed to charge, he saw the second in command of the second unit's head do the same thing when the sound rang out again. He knew they had waited too long and needed to attack right now, or they would start to dwindle their numbers too much. When he finally faced forward, he didn't even charge. In the couple of seconds, he had taken his eyes off the group in front of him. 6 of them had charged straight at them. 2 were coming for his unit while 2 other groups of 2 charged his other units. The 2 charging toward him looked to be a teenage human and a smaller person wearing a mask. He would guess human, but he knew the king wasn't human. It only stood to reason he would have more than just humans serve him. The 2 charging to his left were 2 humans. One had red hair in twin ponytails, while the other had black hair up in a bun. The 2 who ran to his right were an incredibly busted blonde human and tan human with black hair in a ponytail. Grudel realized he could be wrong about all of them when the 2 on the left of him got close. The one with the red hair stopped in her tracks and let out a howl that had the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. It was only seconds later when he saw her turn into the largest, red-haired werewolf Grudel had ever seen. Hair color truly didn't matter because he had never seen a werewolf that large, but he had also never seen a werewolf with that color fur. The black-haired human did not stop as the werewolf did. She continued on, and he watched as she jumped right over the commander of the unit, landed right in front of the unit, and slammed her fist into the ground. Earth slash. The ground erupted in a line straight through the third unit. Some of his troops were impaled by the spiked earth, some were thrown up in the air, and many were blasted back by the force. Grudel did notice the woman wasted no time to admire her work. She immediately leaped back in the middle of the unit. Yuri slid by 2 beastmen trying to cleave her in two by sliding on her knees under their weapons. She popped up immediately when the weapons passed by and delivered a roundhouse kick that connected with both of their jaws. The sickening crunch was followed by both of their jaws detaching from their mouths and flying across the battlefield. Yuri was just getting started. She slid in the middle of 4 beastmen who had their weapons up to attack her, but hesitated when they saw what she did to their comrades. That hesitation cost them their lives as Yuri delivered a spinning back fist that connected with all 4 of their temples one after another. Iron Fist. All that was heard from the 4 of them was their skulls being smashed and everything in their heads exploding from the sides of their heads. At no point did Yuri relent. In fact, she just seemed to move faster and faster the more beastmen she laid waste to. She ducked, weaved, and spun around every attack they threw at her and ended each attacker in one blow. Lupus Regina didn't want to be outdone by Yuri, but also knew she couldn't kill too many if she wanted to follow the orders given to her by Oriole. She knew she would get her moment in the end, but still wanted to have a little fun before that. As soon as her transformation was complete, she sprinted faster than the beastmen could keep up with to their flank. She intended to have as much fun as possible, but she'd always follow her captain's orders in battle. Lupus Regina waded through beastman after beastman with her claws and jaw. She slashed, bit, and hacked her way down the line, making sure none survived her assault and none could escape. Lupus Regina wanted nothing more than to get lost in her bloodlust, but by the time she had made it to the back of her assigned unit, Oriole was giving the order that everything was prepped. Lupus Regina made one last pass through the beastmen, and when she neared the front once more, she jumped in the air to clear the remainder of the unit. When she landed, she was no longer the Wolf Queen, but Lupus Regina, the battle cleric. Solution was doing what Lupus Regina had wanted to give into. She sprinted right at her assigned targets like she was shot out of a cannon. Every step she took, she dealt death all around her. Solution was throwing her darts and knives at a pace that was even hard for some of the Pleiades to keep up with. She was throwing her darts so fast, she had to wait a couple of seconds for them to reappear on her person. That is when she started with the knives as well. They filled in that gap instead of waiting, and it was as if she had unlimited throwing weapons when she cycled them like this. Every dart she threw went through at least one beastman and took them out for good. Most of her darts also struck another beastman after passing through the first, and some even managed to go through the second and strike a third. Even those that weren't killed immediately by the dart would die only seconds later due to the strong poison that coated every weapon Solution had at her disposal. By the time she had made it within melee range, she had already killed over 100 beastmen, and she could see the look of sheer terror in each of their eyes as she approached. Solution was sure they did not expect such a deadly woman to be coming for them, but the look of terror in their eyes was even more satisfying than actually killing them. Solution usually liked to transform her hands or fingers into her weapons, but today she would do it the old-fashioned way. She unsheathed the 2 short swords at her side and sliced her way through the ranks of beastmen. Each cut was not meant to kill, but only to wound and inflict as much suffering as possible. Both of her short swords were coated with a nerve toxin that set off every nerve ending in her victim's body, as though they were on fire. It would be the most excruciating minute of their lives before the pain killed them. Solution reveled in their screams of agony as one after another beast man succumbed to her onslaught. While Narbril Gamma also loved to hear the screams and agony of her enemies, she was much more dutiful toward her assignments. She would love nothing more than to torture each of these beastmen slowly for what they tried to do to her king, but she knew she'd get her chance to make them suffer soon. Unlike Solution, Narbril was very calculated with who she killed. While Solution waded through their ranks, Narbril chose to stick to the edges of the formation and only slice a beast man up if they tried to retreat or spread out too wide for their final plans. She hadn't even made it to the end of the line when she heard the signal from Oriole to start the final phase. Narbril sheathed her weapon and jumped in the air to let her fly spell take hold as she went toward the front to meet up with her sisters for the final act. Oriole had taken off at a dead sprint right toward the commander of this whole company when Lena started her onslaught. She knew Intoma was right behind her preparing her own assault. She could feel her behind her, and Oriole knew Intoma was ready when she heard her say, "Bug blade." Oriole didn't need to turn around to see what happened, and she truly didn't have the time anyway. She had come across the commander, and the apekin swung his warhammer straight down toward Oriole's chest from atop his horse. Oriole wasted no time. She put her left foot forward and balanced on her heel while her right foot went behind her, all weight on her toes as she ducked under the blade and slid past. As soon as the warhammer passed her head, she slashed the side of the commander's horse with both of her wakizashi. The commander's horse bucked and threw him off, but Grudel rolled out of it and was on his feet in an instant. He had both hands grasping his warhammer ready to strike Oriole, but she was already gone. Oriole spun and ducked under 3 more blades only to come up, extend both her weapons, and spin herself. She sliced the throats of 6 beastmen as she did. When she stopped, 2 beastmen tried to impale her with their polearms. Oriole parried both attacks by twisting her weapons around the shafts, making their wielders lose balance. The minute they stumbled one step forward, Oriole buried the tip of her weapons in each of their throats. She stood tall and flicked the blood off her blades when she noticed all the beastmen around her take a step back and ready their weapons. An evil smirk that looked eerily similar to Ainz made its way onto her face before she raised one of her wakizashis straight into the air, the other resting at her side. Feel true despair as death embraces you. Oriole looked up and they all noticed her weapon was pointing at something, or rather, someone. They all saw the small maid who had followed her toward them hovering in the air. The sleeve of her maid outfit was impossibly large, and they all felt dread wash over them. Intoma had followed right behind her princess as she was ordered. His first task was easily accomplished. The commander was too concerned with attacking her princess and never saw her coming. Her bug blade went straight through both of his forearms. His hands were still grasping his warhammer as it tumbled to the ground in front of his eyes, and he let out a scream of agony. Intoma didn't have time to worry about that weak apekin, though. She had a job to do. All the beast men were too busy trying to avoid her princess's death blows and hadn't even paid attention to her. She thrust her bug blade straight through the neck of the beastmen on the far left of the front line. Only his death cries drew any attention from her princess, but it was already too late by then. Intoma planted her left foot in the ground, pushed off, and raced down the front line with her weapon held at neck level. She moved too fast for anyone or anything to form a proper defense or even see her coming. Head after head rolled onto the grass and added to the pool of blood forming all over the battlefield. Once Intoma got to the end, she jumped in the air and allowed the fly spell that was cast on her to take over. She held her arm out toward the formation. Her bug blade turned back and crawled in her sleeve as it grew larger and larger. When she saw her princess give the signal, she unleashed death on the Beastman unit. Bug Storm. Intoma's sleeve had expanded to nearly 50 feet across, and a deadly rain of steel bugs shot out of her sleeve. It was as wide as her sleeve had gotten as she swept her arm from the back left corner of the unit to the right. The rear 5 rows of beastmen were pierced through by thousands of her bugs, and it left little more than fleshy scraps of beastmen when the dust cleared. Not a single beastman in any of those rows survived the onslaught of Intoma's new ability. Panic had set in all across the beastmen's lines. They all turned to run back to the city, but the gate was closed tight, and the blonde human was finishing up her rampage. None wanted to run in her direction. Next, they turned to flee the other way, but that was an even worse idea when they saw what was in front of them. Intoma, Yuri, and Solution were all standing near each other, obviously doing some sort of pose. Shizu was still hovering in the air, but now, Lupus Regina, Narbril Gamma, and Oriole were hovering right behind her. While they all looked to be posing in some sort of way, every beastman felt like this was the end somehow, and they weren't wrong when Oriole said for all to hear. Now witness the combined might of the Pleiades. Maximize magic, storm of vengeance. Maximize magic, nuclear blast. Maximize magic, sphere of ultimate destruction. The moment Narbril spoke the words, storm clouds covered the entire left unit and most of the central unit. It was as if they had appeared from nowhere to herald in the doom of these troops. So many lightning strikes went off simultaneously, it was blinding to almost everyone present. Lupus Regina was no different. As soon as the words left her lips, a bright flash of white expanded from the right unit. It encompassed the entirety of the unit and almost stretched into Narbril's storm. Only around 100 feet separated the spells, but that space and more was quickly filled in. Oriole had formed a 200-foot wide black sphere. Many say something is so black it sucks in the light around it, but this black sphere of death was literally sucking in everything within 10 feet of its edge. Oriole guided the sphere straight into the middle of the center formation, filling in the empty space and overlapping with Lupus Regina's and Narbril's spell. When the blinding light and spells had finally cleared, only 3 things could be heard. The first was Ainz clapping and beaming at Oriole, not only for a sound strategy being executed flawlessly, but also for putting on quite the show. The second thing would be Taylar with 2 fingers in her mouth whistling in celebration of Oriole. She was even waving her other hand around like one of those crazy moms at sporting events. The third thing was sobbing. As they looked toward the destruction, they all noticed the handless commander had not perished with his troops. He was on his knees, head buried in the dirt, crying like a baby. Looking around, you could understand why. The left formation was nothing more than blackened earth and blackened bodies. It looked as if the lightning strikes had hit every spot inside the clouds, and none had survived. The only remnants of the right formation were a few blackened bones and the ash that used to be beastmen blowing away with the wind. The heat was so intense from the blast, the crater it formed in the ground was a thin sheet of glass. The center formation and a little bit into the left and right ones was no more. That is meant in the literal sense. There were no bodies, no ashes, no blood, no nothing. It was as if everything that had been in that 200-foot radius had never existed. For quite a few minutes, only those three sounds could be heard as everyone took in the area around them until the front gate began to open. When it raised high enough to see inside, Lena's had just decapitated the last two beastmen, and the gate was open for them to enter. Oriole, bring her to us. Silent, forced teleportation. Oriole didn't waste a moment to follow her mother's instructions. Lena's appeared right in front of Ainz and Taylar, Oriole, and the rest of the Pleiades at her back. The blonde warrior was covered in a lot of blood, but the smile on her face was easily seen by all. Very well done, Lena's. Cositus has certainly taught you well and did not exaggerate how much you have grown as a warrior. Thank you, my queen. I only wish to become useful enough to repay all the blessings and gifts you have bestowed upon me. You have yet to let me down, Lena's. Have you gotten your fill of combat for the day, or would you like to get some more practice in? I would like to test myself some more if you need my services, my queen. Oriole, you're going to clear the city in two-man teams, correct? Yes, mother. Narbril and Solution, Lupus Regina and Yuri, and Shizu and Intoma will pair up and root out any beastmen still lingering in the city. Why don't you join them and take Lena's as your partner? Show her the tactics of clearing a building, securing the city, dealing with prisoners, etc. Oriole bowed to her mother and then set off with the Pleiades and Lena's to secure the city for her parents. Taylar took the time to properly introduce herself to the nobility of the Draconic Kingdom while the city was being cleared. Not a single moment of Taylar interacting with those from the Draconic Kingdom surprised Ainz. She had every one of them eating out of the palm of her hand in minutes. Ainz was sure she had most of them under her spell before she even opened her mouth. Taylar's interaction with Queen Draudolin was something to behold. Ainz was half convinced Draudolin would give up her pursuit and flirting with Ainz and direct it to Taylar. He didn't actually see that happen, but he could tell Draudolin now realized her hopes might be out of her reach no matter what she did or said. Just like last time, it didn't take the Pleiades long to clear the city. It was faster with Lena's and Oriole helping, so it didn't take an hour, as it did in the last city. It did, unfortunately, take 5 days just like the last city to get everything in order. This time, Ainz spent more time wandering the streets of Derave than he did in Ajert. Ainz even participated in a few council meetings this time as well. He truly didn't want to, but Taylar came back twice to accompany him, and any chance he got to be near her he took. At first, he wondered why she was here when she didn't come to Ajert, but it didn't take long to figure out. She was marking her territory, and Ainz felt bad. He gave the Draconic Queen some false hope with his words. If the way Taylar was acting was any indication, Draudolin didn't stand a chance to accomplish her goals. Taylar not only clung to Ainz every moment she was in his presence, but Ainz was also sure everything she wore those 2 days was to show Draudolin she'd never have anything Taylar did. Not her body, not her elegant grace, not her priceless wardrobe, and certainly not her husband. The nail in the coffin to Ainz on his assumption was the end of their last council meeting yesterday. When they were all preparing to leave the meeting and prepare their troops, Taylar had spoken quietly with Albedo. Ainz didn't know what it was about until he left holding Taylar's hand only to have Albedo slide up on his other side and take his free hand. Albedo not only leaned into him to walk as Taylar was doing, but she also threw a look over her shoulder at Draudolin and smile when she did. He knew the Draconic Queen had little to no chance after that. Yesterday, they had finished getting Derive in order with Queen Draudolin leaving 3 nobles in charge this time instead of 1. And now they were standing outside the city of Arades. Queen Draudolin had told Ainz it meant mighty in Draconic, and it was easy to see why. This city was more like a fortress than either of the other cities. While the other cities had good defenses, this city was completely built with it in mind. The walls were 3 times as thick and twice as high as the other 2 cities. The castle was built as a pure fortress, and even the buildings inside the walls were strategically placed, so an invading army would have to wind through a maze to get to the castle. Ainz was impressed, to say the least. Ainz realized then that the king of the beastmen wasn't some stupid, but strong beastman. There was a reason he chose to hold this city himself, even though the others were more strategically important. Derive was the main import city of the Draconic Kingdom, so the beastmen would control the supplies lines by holding that city. Ajert was the oldest and former capital of the Draconic Kingdom cities. It would considerably lessen the Draconic Kingdom's morale if he held that city, but he'd choose the one that would be, by far, the hardest to reconquer. Ainz had found out that the beast man he sent to get a message to his king did actually make it. Grudel informed them, after very little pressure, that the king had sent a rider to them after his slam doll made it to his king. Ainz was going to handle this encounter much differently than the last 2 because of this. He had a feeling this beast man, even if he was king, would be much more open to simply surrendering to him. After learning about the Beastmen Kingdom, he had a trick up his sleeve he believed would net him everything he was going to ask of the Beastmen King. That is why Ainz was here all alone except for Narble Gamma. There would be no combat for the Pleiades if everything went to plan, and if they were needed, it was as simple as a message to Oriole and a gate. They'd all be here in under a minute if they were needed. Narble Gamma was here for a few reasons, some of which Ainz was assuming, but pretty sure he was right. First, even he insisted they needed to always keep some semblance of a royal personage, so they had servants with them everywhere they went. The other reasons were much more personal no matter how you looked at it. Ainz had the time to speak with Narble the day after the battle in Derive. Finally, Taylar had been right as usual. Ainz had only seen small smiles on Narble's stoic face occasionally, but the girl and as if the woman's head couldn't get any bigger, she was also correct in her assessment that Narble would love to be shared by Ainz, Taylar, and Albedo. She even reminded them a few times in the last couple of days that she was more than comfortable with Lupus Regina sharing the bed with them at the same time. So Ainz was sure the reason Taylar insisted it be Narble Gamma as the Pleiades who accompanied him was for 2 reasons. The first was so that Narble could get some time with Ainz. And the second, much more petty reason, was so Draudolin would see she kept falling farther and farther behind. Ainz still felt bad, but it wasn't as if he was holding Narble's hand, groping her, or doing anything like that in front of Draudolin. That didn't mean he didn't enjoy his time with Narble at night, but he didn't flaunt it during the day. Everyone had already seen how much of a lucky son of a bitch he was when they met Taylar. He was sure that if, no, when they met Albedo, they'd die of jealousy toward him. Ainz had only had to stand outside the city walls with the white flag up for a couple of minutes before he saw the front gate opening and a very large beast man coming out. Ainz had seen lionkin, apekin, tigerkin, and many other beastmen races, but this was the first time he'd seen a bearkin. He had a good feeling this was their king, and the bearkin didn't disappoint. The bearkin was walking on two legs, and he was nearly 10 feet tall walking like that. He looked stronger than any beastman Ainz had come across by far. Ainz knew he'd still get slapped and decapitated by Narbrel if he got out of line, so he wasn't concerned. The bearkin was only level 58. I am the exalted king of the Psycho Kingdom, Ainz Olgown. Ainz started when the Beastmen King was close enough. I have come here today to offer you terms for your surrender. There is no need for the rest of your men to share the same fate that has befallen those who stood against me in the last two cities. I am Koa, king of the Beastmen. You may have taken the other two cities, but this one will not fall so easily. Why would I surrender to a king with no army to back up his words? That is simple. I know you are no fool, King Koa. I see no foolishness in holding out in a siege against an enemy with no army. No matter how strong you may be, even you could not take this city by yourself against me and my 25,000 troops. A fool you are not, but a liar you certainly are. We both know you have 13,000 troops behind those walls. You can try to act as if you have the higher ground, but we both know what happened in the other two cities you used to occupy. If you truly believe I can't take this city myself, you are not nearly as intelligent as I believed you to be. The Beastman King looked completely put out at Ainz's words. Not only because Ainz guessed his troop count perfectly, but also because he knew everything Ainz said was true. That didn't mean he'd just surrender for nothing. You said you bring terms. What are they? You shall remain king of the Beastmen and rule it in the name of myself and my queens, but you will hold the title of King Reagent instead of king. You will help the Draconic Kingdom rebuild all you helped destroy by supplying the labor required for such a task. You will sign a pact, acknowledging your pledge and all other Beastmen, that slavery is a thing of the past and all citizens who belong to the Psycho Kingdom shall be treated fairly and honestly regardless of race or gender. And finally you will supply the Psycho Kingdom with a battalion of 15,000 beastmen for use in our army, and I want soldiers, not fighters. A unit is useless if everyone can't follow orders. You believe I would agree to giving up so much and getting nothing in return? Oh, you will agree. You are getting the most precious gift in return for my mercy, your life. If I felt so inclined, I could slaughter you here before you could blink, kick that front gate down, and wade through that city inch by inch, bathing it in the blood of beastmen. Watching a 10-foot-tall bear standing on two legs gulp might have been one of the funniest things Ainz will ever see in his life. He knew he got through to this beastman. Now, it was time to allow him to save face for scaring the thing so badly. But I understand your kingdom only follows the strong. While I could kill you and prove my strength, I would rather keep you alive to rule your lands, so I will give you a chance to save face in front of all of those watching. They will understand watching you kneel here and now when they witness the might of who they are standing against. I dash. Ainz didn't let the Beastmen King speak. He wasn't through speaking yet, and the man would soon know exactly what he meant. I heard a very interesting tale of the Beastmen Kingdom while I was learning about it. You once had a city of over 100,000 people, but 3 legendary undead known as Soul Eaters killed almost everyone in the city, and now it is known as the Silent City. Koa had never felt a single moment of fear in his entire life. He had been one of the strongest beastmen since birth, and he only moved up the older he got. However, the smile on this king's face when he looked at him now turned his blood to ice. With this tale in mind, I'd like for you to meet the cavalry you shall face if you decline my generous proposal. The moment Ainz finished, a greater gate opened 100 feet behind him. It was larger than anyone, other than Ainz or Narbrel, had ever witnessed. The only sound that could be heard was a hoofbeat. It was so loud, it rang through the air all over the city. It wasn't long before everyone knew why it was so loud. Straight out of the portal came soul eaters being ridden by an undead none of the beast men had ever seen. They all moved in perfect sync, and it sounded like one large creature moving instead of a battalion of cavalry. They all knew the tale of the Silent City, but even that could have never prepared them for what they saw. Walking in perfect formation, they came out of the portal 100 across. They marched forward until the last of them was out of the greater gate, and it closed. When every beast man witnessed the sight, they all fell to their knees in terror. There wasn't a single row of 100 soul eaters, there were 100 rows of 100. 10,000 soul eaters stood in front of the draconic city of Arades. 7,500 of them were being ridden by death cavaliers, while the other 2,500 had winter whites atop their backs. Ainz didn't need his super senses to know the Beastmen King, and most of those watching from the walls had soiled themselves. Their legend of horror consisted of 3 soul eaters, and here in front of them stood 10,000 with riders. Their terror was understandable. When Ainz looked at Koa, he needed to contain the same laugh he wanted to let out when he saw the Berkin gulping. His rival king was crying like a baby, and it was an incredibly strange and funny thing to witness. It lasted for a while until Koa minded his surroundings enough to fling himself at the feet of Ainz, his face in the ground, completely submitting to Ainz's power.
Hvor
The people of the Beastman Kingdom. Pledge our fealty and you undying loyalty to T the Great, Supreme, Exalted King Ainz Old G Gown, and H's Queens. We shall be your strongest and most loyal vassals for all tea time. Considering the fear clearly evident on King Koa's face, Ainz thought that was a pretty good speech and pledge of fealty. He was going to keep the soul eaters standing here for a few days, but that didn't mean he couldn't move this along. My queens, and I accept your pledge, King Reagent Koa. Rise and collect your people so you may address them. You shall have 2 hours to gather them, speak with them, and have them come out of the front gate unarmed to surrender. Fail in this task and your surrender and fealty are void, and I shall have my cavalry deal with you instead. Ainz watched Koa get up, bow, take 2 steps, bow, take 2 more, bow, and finally, he had to wave the terrified Berkin off. The man bowed 8 times before he just sprinted away. Ainz thought all he was doing was wasting precious seconds, but apparently, he was supposed to wave him off. He'd need to have someone learn the Beastmen Kingdom royal commands. It was starting to get draining dealing with. Ainz gave Koa 2 hours to complete his task. It had taken only 37 minutes for every Beastman to appear unarmed, on their knees in front of the wall to surrender. Most of those on the wall had tossed their weapons down before their king even said his pledge. About 1,000 had already laid down in surrender before Koa made it through the gate. Ainz enjoyed how easy this part was the most. Their stay in Arades was by far the shortest. Koa was much more organized than the other 2 Beastmen leaders, and also much smarter. He knew where everything was in this city, from supplies to prisoners. Ainz didn't even have to worry about many casualties in the city. Koa knew prisoners were key to his victory, so the only noble killed in the city was the one who betrayed the city and let the Beastmen in. Ainz thought that was smart. He'd be no use as a hostage, and he was sure that Koa must have been hungry. They had gotten lucky in the first city, and it hadn't suffered nearly as many casualties as they believed. They had no such luck when they retook Derave. Only 20,000 citizens from the Draconic city made it through the occupation to be rescued, and none of the nobility survived. Here in Arades, Koa had kept nearly 90% of the population intact. A pretty remarkable feat to Ainz considering Beastman's usual food source was humans. They only spent 2 days and a single night in Arades before it was deemed in order by Queen Draudalin, and that was yesterday. Now, they were handling the only thing left for this visit to the Draconic Kingdom, the Victory Feast. Ainz had grabbed the nobles from each city and left the commanders in charge earlier. He was waiting outside the door to enter because his dates had not arrived yet. Ainz was surprisingly excited for this feast. It had nothing to do with winning the war quickly, and everything to do with it being historic for Ainz himself. Something was about to happen that he never thought would, and the anticipation was killing him until the gate opened behind him. Out strode his dates for the night. Taylar, Albedo, Oriole, Rabido, Lupus Regina, and Narbril Gamma all came out one after the next. Since this was an official royal appearance, they had set some guidelines to be followed by all of them, but it was the first time they had all gone out together. Sure, they saw each other in Nazareth often, but they weren't all together at once hardly ever. Plus, Narbril hadn't exactly been a part of this for long anyway. It had only been a week since Ainz talked to her. Ainz isn't sure this would happen again, and despite his excitement, he still wasn't very happy that Albedo was here. Ainz was half afraid her water would break at the feast, that's how big she was. She was still drop-dead gorgeous, but she was big. Each one of his dates was dressed to impress. Not a single one of them tried in the slightest not to look as sexy as possible except for Oriole, and he'd be forever grateful for that. Even Narbril Gamma had willingly sat down in the chair and allowed Claire to do her hair and pick out a dress. All of them sort of had a signature color to them depending on the woman, and it was usually their lipstick color that they chose to make that statement in. It had started that night in the Baharuth Empire when Narbril had first dressed up as a representative of their kingdom instead of a maid. Narbril came out in the same shade of dark blue lipstick she was wearing on her lips right now. It was the same not seconds after Narbril came out that Rabido had come out wearing black lipstick, which she was also currently wearing. After that, all the women seemed to pick a color and stick with it. Taylar went with a dark green that complemented her shining green emerald eyes. Albedo surprised him and went with pink. He thought for sure she'd go for red or yellow, but pink did make her lips shine. Lupus Regina went with her usual crimson. It not only matched her hair, but it was also the color of blood, and Ainz knew there was little she loved more than spilling blood. And while Ainz had gotten used to most of them showing this much skin and cleavage, it was still a sight to behold, especially Narbril Gamma. She had dressed up once before, but she was in a pretty formal dress at that time. The one she had on now was just sexy as hell. If how you judged a woman's body was the size of her tits and ass, Narbril had the worst body amongst all those present. She had an ass, but it wasn't big. She had good-sized breasts, but they were only maybe a C-cup. However, that didn't mean she wasn't perfect from head to toe. She wore dark blue again, but this dress showed more skin than Narbril ever had. There were 2 thin straps of dark blue that came up her front and wrapped around her neck. The only other thing that wasn't her tan skin was the dark blue, sapphire necklace dangling down in between her cleavage. The fabric wrapped tightly around her bust and then opened up. There were windows where her sides and stomach were on full display, not a scrap of anything but her skin there for Ainz's viewing pleasure. It clung to her hips like a second skin, then loosened and flowed freely down her legs. There was no need for a slit in it because it stopped just above her knees. She had dark blue heels on to match, and the bracelet Ainz gifted her on her right wrist. Claire did her hair in waves with highlights of dark blue as she did all the time now, and the usual stoic Narborough Gamma had a soft smile on her face as Ainz appraised her appearance. Taylar was not one to be outdone herself as Ainz looked her over. She had on a dark green bodycon dress to match her lipstick, necklace, and bracelet. While this bodycon dress hugged her body from bust to upper thigh as normal, there were also thousands of small diamonds that adorned her dress to accentuate her curves. And Taylar had every curve a woman could wish for. As if the woman didn't look alluring enough already, she had on a pair of sky-high, forest green, lace-up, 8-inch heels with satin ties that wrapped all the way up her legs to her knees. Her wavy, golden blonde hair was shining like the sun running down her back. Albedo, in all her pregnant glory, wasn't being outshined in the least, even heavily pregnant. She wore a pink and black cocktail dress that he is sure only one of these women could pull off this pregnant. It had a diamond collar where 2 chains attached from the top of the bust. The V-scoop in the dress went impossibly low, and Albedo was nearly spilling out of it from all sides. The top was made of pink satin and looked to perfectly complement Albedo's soft porcelain skin. Just below the bust was a band of diamonds that wrapped around the dress to show off her massive assets to maximum effect. Below the diamond band, the dress was black satin. It hugged every inch of her going down, including her belly, and stopped just above her knee. However, the black fabric only went down her right leg and over enough to graze the inside of her left leg. Her left leg was exposed up to her hip, and 5 mithril chains were the only thing keeping the material in place. Albedo might be ready to burst, but she also still looked ready to be taken at any moment. She was even wearing 6-inch black heels. The only jewelry she had on was her engagement and wedding rings. Albedo was no slouch herself. While she had always been beautiful, she had gotten sexier and sexier every day to Ainz. The reasoning was simple. She tried to look sexier and sexier every day for Ainz. Albedo was wearing what women referred to as their little black dress. 2 thin straps went up and around her shoulders while leaving the rest of her skin from the bust up exposed. A platinum chain hung down from her neck, with a black diamond charm dangling between her ample cleavage. There was a small circular window, opening in her bust studded in diamonds to show off even more cleavage. The black material stretched over every inch of her flesh down her tight body until it ended abruptly on her upper thigh. Her silky smooth legs were on full display, and the black, 4-inch heels only helped that display to look even more appealing than it already did. The only other thing to distract was the ring Ainz had given her on her left ring finger and the platinum and black diamond bracelet Albedo had on her right wrist. Albedo's hair had been done up. Lupus Regina looked to take this invitation as a challenge of some sort because it is hard to describe her outfit and get a very good idea of what Ainz is seeing. Starting with that pretty face would probably be easier. Lupus Regina was sporting her regular crimson lipstick that matched the ruby earrings hanging from her ears. Her hair was not in twin tails, though. It was loose, wavy, and almost down to the small of her back. Ainz is sure by now there is no need to explain why she chose to wear it as such. But this is where Ainz was having trouble. Ainz knew she had on a top and a mini skirt, but it looked like a dress. The top was crimson and long-sleeved, but other than her arms, it barely covered anything. The crimson fabric came from her upper arms and wrapped down over her breasts. It certainly didn't cover them completely, and there was cleavage from every angle. The fabric crossed over to the other breast and was thin enough that it only cupped the bottom of her breasts before disappearing. There was no more fabric except a thin piece of crimson that crossed right above her belly button and disappeared on her hip. Everything else was exposed skin. There wasn't any more material to cover her until the crimson leather mini skirt that hugged her hips. It showed off the curve of her hips and ass to perfection, and only went down far enough to cover her ass. Her smooth thighs were on display, and there was nothing to distract below that until you saw her heels. They were a pair of crimson, satin, lace-up 6-inch heels that wound around her calves and tied just below her knees. Ainz wasn't sure how this night would end, or with who, but he was certain he'd have nothing to complain about tomorrow. His brain must have done it in this order for a reason, because he didn't look to Oriole until last. His mind stopped racing of all the things he'd like to try with each of them when he laid eyes on his daughter. It served as a great way to calm his raging hormones down to acceptable levels. Ainz was under no illusions that his daughter wasn't gorgeous. He knew very well how beautiful Oriole was, and it was also well known how much Ainz loved the fact she didn't get her fashion sense from Taylar or Albedo. Oriole's chosen lipstick color had turned out to be gold, and while she didn't wear it often, she did for occasions like this. It helps that the only colors she really wore were black, red, and white, since she could pull off gold with all of them. Oriole's hair was half braided, half down. The single braid in her hair wrapped around her head like a crown, and Claire had weaved yellow diamond through it. They matched the earrings, necklace, and bracelet she wore. The rest of her hair was loose and wavy like Taylar's. It was pulled over the braid to keep it out of her face and spilled down her back. Oriole's dress was made of white satin and showed off next to nothing, especially compared to what Ainz just saw on the others. Her collarbone was exposed, and the sleeves were only about 2-inch long, but Ainz loved it. Over the bust of the dress laid a black lace. There was an intricate design of a sakura tree centered on her bust, and on the sides were petals that looked to have fallen off the tree. The white satin then went down from there and got looser the lower it went. The front of the dress stopped at her knees while the back continued down to almost touching the floor. At the back of the dress on the inside was a black lace pattern of sakura petals. Ainz could see it since the front was higher than the back. You wouldn't be able to see it otherwise since it was on the inside of the dress. Ainz wasn't too happy that Oriole's legs could be seen from her knees down, but he just took it as a win. At least she didn't show up in something like the others were wearing. He was thankful she went with small 2, maybe 3-inch black heels as well. He'd feel a certain kind of way if she was trying to show off her legs, and Ainz is sure he'd kill someone by the end of the night because of it. Ainz made sure to praise each of them enough to get a blush out of them before they headed to the feast. Ainz walked in with Taylar on one arm and Albedo on the other. Rabido followed behind with Oriole, while Lupus Regina and Narbril brought up the rear. Ainz expected the silence when they entered, but even he thought it lasted way too long. The feast didn't start back up until he playfully, but completely seriously, threatened everyone to stop staring. Once he had that handled, he went up on stage with Taylar, Albedo, Oriole, and Drawdlin to toast to their victory and a strong alliance for the future. All in all, it ended up being a good time. But considering his feasts in this world so far consisted of Philip touching Rabido and the slain theocracy trying to poison him, anything would have been a step up and a good time compared to those. He managed to dance with all of them that night. even made Oriole dance with him 3 times. She acted annoyed and puffed her cheeks out in annoyance, but Ainz saw her smile as he turned to lead them to the dance floor. It was the perfect way to wrap up their victory in the Draconic Kingdom.
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.